Ayos pa yung ano ko, boko?
Oo.
JP will ang mag-open ng ating webinar ay si Chancellor ha. So mag-welcome lang ako ng maikli and then I will call Chancellor and then tsaka lang tayo kay Doc Edsel. Ayaw mag-work nung video ko. So I'll just start kahit na wala akong video. Okay lang ba yon? JP, Will?
Yes po, okay lang po.
Okay, sige. So Chancellor, mag-start na tayo.
Sige.
Okay. Magandang hapon sa ating lahat at welcome sa third session ng ating webinar series. Matapos talakayin ang mass testing noong Enero at ang mutations and vaccines noong Pebrero, ngayon naman ay tatalakayin natin ang bagong bugso ng COVID-19. Ano ang dapat nating alamin? Sa harap ng tumataas na namang bilang ng mga kaso, ano nga ba ang epekto nito sa ating komunidad? Sa huling report ng Philippine Genome Center, nakumpirma nila na ang South African variant ay natagpuan sa UP Diliman. Ngayong hapon, inibitahan ulit natin si Dr. Edsel para ipaliwanag ito. Kasama rin natin ang ating mga doktor mula sa University Health Service, sina Dr. Marisa Alip, sina Dr. Alisa Pangaiba, si Dr. Jessica Tabo. Baka mamaya ay madaragdagan pa tayo ng mga kasama natin mula sa UHS. Pero bago tayo pumunta kay Dr. Ayes, tinatawagan natin si Chancellor Fidel Nemenso para sa paunang mga pananalita. Chancellor.
Salamat, Dulce. Narinig niyo ako?
Yes, malinaw, Chancellor.
Salamat, Dulce. Magandang hapon sa lahat. Narito na naman tayo kaharap ng panibagong hamon, ang bagong bugso ng COVID virus. Isang taon mula nang nagsimula ang pandemya. Kung matatandaan niyo, kaupo ko pa lamang bilang Chancellor noong March 2021, nang ipinatawag kong kauna-unahang meeting ng UP Diliman COVID-19 Task Force. The task force is a diverse and dynamic group composed of faculty from different disciplines, medical doctors from the UP Health Service and the Philippine Genome Center, staff from different offices and representatives from our students, and members of the UP Diliman Executive Committee. Noong mga panahong yun, nangangapa kami dahil wala pa tayong masyadong alam tungkol sa COVID-19. Hindi natin alam kung paano ang epektibong paglaban dito. Pero unti-unti, nag-trial and error tayo, nag-aral ng task force at sumubok ng iba't ibang paraan para harapin ang pandemya at protektahan ang komunidad ng UP Diliman. Since March 2020, the UP Diliman Task Force has been meeting almost once a week to monitor the situation in UP Diliman, to plan and implement measures to protect our community and continue processes and services in the university amidst the pandemic. If you remember, even before the government declared the community quarantine and lockdown, we already decided in UP Diliman that we will shift to work from home arrangements and remote learning platforms. We received the usual criticism, but our decisions eventually were proven to be correct. Sa pagbabalik tanaw, marami tayong natutunan sa panahon ng pandemya. Ang isa dito ay ang pag-unawa na may maaaring gawin para mabawasan ang panganib sa ating paligid. While we cannot completely eliminate the risk, there are always ways to reduce risk and minimize the impact of these risks. Natutunan natin magsuot ng face mask at face shield sa araw-araw. Natutunan nating ipagpaliban ang pakikihalubilo. Sa UP, unti-unti natin pinalakas ang mga mekanismo, ang pagtatalaga ng mga post-ECQ teams at health liaison officers sa mga unit, ang pagbubukas ng kanlungang Palma at Silungang Malave isolation facilities, ang pagpapalakas ng ating contact tracing at public information campaigns. Mahalaga ang pagsasapraktika nito sa lahat ng antas ng universidad. Matindi ang kinaharap nating sitwasyon ngayon. Sa bagong bugso ng COVID-19 cases, para tayong bumalik nung nakaraang taon. At nitong Lunes, nabanggit na ni Dulce, ay minilabas tayong advisory na ang tinatawag na South African Variant ay matatagpuan na sa UP Diliman. So panibagong pagsubok ito sa atin. At para harapin ang pagsubok na ito, ang webinar na ito ay ginagawa natin ngayong hapon para mabigyan tayo ng impormasyon at para mas maunawaan natin ang kalagayan ng UP Diliman at para matulungan na labanan ito. Nagpapasalamat ako kay Dr. Edsel ng Philippine Genome Center na muli nating inimbita para magsalita sa ating webinar. Salamat siyempre sa Philippine Genome Center na nasa scientific front lines sa laban sa virus at pandemya. Since the start of the pandemic, the PGC has been doing our RT-PCR test for our community and several LGUs. It has been doing the sequencing and identification of the different emerging variants of the virus and has been providing our government valuable scientific advice. See, Dr. Edsel is the head of PGC's lab and he is an expert in virology and immunology. Marami siyang maibabahagi tungkol sa South African variant at maging sa mga bagong Philippine variant. Paunang pasasalamat din kay Dr. Mai Alip na makakasama natin mamaya para sumagot ng mga katanungan at magbibigay siya ng closing remarks. Si Dr. Alip pala ang ating bagong direktor sa ating University Health Service at kilala sa kanyang gawain sa larangan ng family medicine at diabetology. Salamat din sa ITDC at sa UP Computer Center na nag-host sa ating webinar at sa UP Diliman Information Office na nagla-livestream ng ating webinar. At muli sa inyong lahat, maraming salamat. Please share this information with others. We can all help each other to protect ourselves and the community. Magandang hapon. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Chancellor Nemenzo. Hindi na natin patatagalin. Tawagin natin si Dr. Edsel na siyang Lab Manager and Clinical Health Specialist ng Philippine Genome Center. Doc Ayes.
Good afternoon po. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pag-imbita sa akin para mag-speak tungkol sa topic na to. I know it comes at a time na tumataas na naman po yung mga kaso sa bansa. At aminin po natin, it is a combination of multiple factors, no po, bukod po sa increased movement of people and some levels of, syempre alam ko pagod po lahat ng mga tao. And the light of the end of the tunnel with the vaccines has made some people a bit more careless, of course. Aaminin po natin yan. But it comes in combination with the introduction of these new variants. Ang term na ginagamit ko tuwing nagsasalita ako sa task force is it's a perfect storm of sorts. And I think one of the best ways to talk about this is in the context of vaccines. Kasi I'll talk first about yung vaccines kasi yun yung medyo hot topic ngayon. Nagkasabay lang kasi to with the variants. And I will introduce to you how the variants would affect the vaccines, no? Kasi it does have certain implications. Pero can I enable yung screen sharing para ma-share yung slides ko? Pero if anything, alam ko there's a lot of information going around. It's very technical and it's very complex, no po? And minsan hindi talaga may iwasan po yung mga fears ng mga tao because this is a very complex subject granted talaga. Lalo na when you're talking about vaccines, maraming pong may pagkaalinlangan ng mga tao bukod sa safety niya, yung efficacy. All of those things I want to try and address in the context of the pandemic. And now what are we going to do na may mga variant na to, no? And because of that, I want to talk to you guys about it in a more laid-back fashion. Na parang our experience with vaccines goes way back into the past. Kung mag-history lesson po tayo ng konti. Malakas po ang UP sa history, so we'll start with that, no? So I want to start with this picture. Kung alam niyo yung ito. I want to give context kasi to the fears that people are having in the pandemic. Some of you might have seen this. There is a certain doctor din who dressed up like this in a recent conference to sort of make a message, no? And this is known as the plague doctor, no? Common yung depictions na to in the 15th century. Nangyari to nung laganap yung Black Death, kung tawagin. It's the plague that was caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. And nung panahon yun, yung understanding kasi nila sa sakit, para siyang masamang hangin. Kumbaga sa Biblia, no, akala nila yung mga kasalanan ng isang tao, yun ang rason kung bakit nagkakasakit. Kaya parang they're being punished by God. Yun ang parang dating nila. And baka mahawa ka kung lumapit ka kasi may masasamang hangin na nalalanghap sa kanila. So yung mga plague doctors na to, they wore these suits. Mukhang may beak siya kasi doon sa pinakadulo ng beak, may nakatagong mga pang-amoy. Very strong herbs and senses na naniniwala sila it will ward off the ano. So, and then they'd wear the robes para hindi sila matatasikan ng evil air. And then they use yung baston na yan para hindi nila mahawakan diretso yung mga tao. So this was their crude understanding of how infections occur. And there are a lot of parallels to it today. No? Kapag hindi nyo masyadong naintindihan or you have fears about how the virus is spread, syempre ganun din yung parang pag-unawa. No? Sometimes a lot of people say, hindi ko alam paano ko nahawa. No? And a lot of times it leads to some extreme sort of measures. Like minsan, kapag na may nagkaroon ng isang kaso sa isang opisina, lahat sila nagsasarahan. Pero what I'm trying to share to you here, gaya ng sabi po ni Chancellor, it's about risk. No, we're not about totally eliminating risk. It's also about identifying, and we have a better idea and understanding of how the virus is spread now. That's why hindi na kailangan yung parang ganito, the old ways of thinking na hindi natin alam nasaan siya mag-close lahat. But that just shows you it's natural to think in such a way because that's how we used to think about things. But more information and the scientist is what empowers us to lessen the risk of exposure to people. So much so na actually, what we're trying to do when we're addressing the pandemic is we're talking about immunity. And I want to talk about immunity as a concept because this is key to understanding how vaccines help and also how variants can affect the course of the pandemic. Now, immunity was something that was documented matagal pa nung bago pa panahon ni Cristo, no? Kasi pansin daw nila yung mga nahawa dun sa plague. Kapag nabuhay sila, hindi sila namatay, they won't get it again. So ang documentation dito, no one who was ever attacked the second time died as a result. Yun ang pansin nila. So they had this concept na kapag nahawa ka, tapos nabuhay ka, you didn't die, okay ka na, parang exempt ka na from another infection. Yun ang pansin nila. So there was this idea of immunity. And it extends to mga ibang bagay. There was a king called the Poison King of Pontus, no? Bago panahon na naman ni Cristo. This was during the time that the Romans were expanding sa Mediterranean. Tapos itong si Mithridates IV, isang king siya sa may area ng Pontus, which is around modern-day Greece. Tapos takot siya, praning siya kasi baka mamaya i-usurp siya ng mga Roman. So akala niya baka may magpapatay sa kanya, maglalagay ng lason sa kanyang pagkain. He thought if I take small amounts of poison, magiging immune ako dun sa mga poison na gagamitan sa akin. So this concept na small exposures of something that's potentially lethal will give you tolerance or immunity to the actual thing kapag na-expose ka. So this is the concept of immunity as we were trying to, it's crude, pero it's getting there. And it wasn't until the 1700s na-introduce yung concept of inoculation. And this is the first evidence that this sort of method of giving the disease in the people that it's meant to prevent could potentially protect. No? Kasi you combine the old idea na kapag nahawa ka at nabuhay ka, you'll be protected. And small amounts of that will parang masasanay ka para maprotektahan ka. This is what happened in the 1700s where there was an outbreak in Boston sa US that was help prevented by thanks to a slave that was brought from Africa. Ang pangalan niya is Onesimus. No? Just a little tidbit, during those times, yung mga slaves, they were usually renamed to biblical names. So Onesimus is a biblical name. No? So this particular slave, yung slave owner niya kasi, parang he heard about a finding sa London na kapag yung nana ng mga taong they were infected by something called smallpox at the time, para siyang tigdas na mas malala, no? Yung mga people infected with smallpox at the time, 60 to 70% mortality. They found out kapag kinuha yung nana ng isang taong patapos na yung kanyang infection at ipinasok ito sa isang tao hindi pa infected, ay they will get milder disease, hindi kasing lubha, and then they're protected afterwards. So this was the first form of inoculation, and it was effective kasi sa Boston nung inintroduce, they were able to save many lives, and the surrounding towns around the Boston area, although tumaas yung mga kaso nila, sila naman hindi tumaas. So this is one of the earliest documented efforts of some widespread inoculation to save people. So our experience with vaccines goes that far back, no, sa smallpox. Pero when you think about it, medyo hit and miss yung strategy na to. Kasi paano kapag mali ang timing mo? Kinuha mo yung nana, pero medyo malakas pa yung virus. So nung nilagay mo sa tao na yan, they more or less got the disease, so you're spreading it. So medyo crude pa yung method na to. Hindi siya ganong ka-safe, no? Although it was able to save people, it's still not as safe, no? Kasi you're essentially infecting other people. Controlled infection, kumbaga. That wasn't until 1796. Pumasok na tong si pangalan ni si Edward Jenner. No, meron siyang obserbasyon. Napansin niya yung mga milkmaid, yung mga nang kumukuha ng gata sa baka. Napansin niya hindi sila nahahawa ng smallpox. In fact, they get a very mild disease called cowpox. Yung cowpox, it's caused by a virus similar to smallpox. Pero sa cow siya karaniwan na-infect. Hindi siya sanay sa tao. So kapag pumasok sa tao, yung sakit niya very mild kasi hindi sanay nga yung virus niya sa tao. But because of that, the person gains immunity from the actual smallpox. So naisip niya, kumuha siya ng virus na yun, yung cowpox, kinulture niya, at yan na lang ang ipinilagay sa mga tao. And this was the first modern vaccine. Kasi they were able to do it in a way na mas kontrolado nila. Hindi nagkakaroon ng malubhang sakit na smallpox, and they were able to lessen the cases of smallpox throughout the modern world. So this is the modern day vaccine. So pansin mo, we're moving from exposure to the actual illness to something close to it. So immunity is about giving information. So we'll talk about how they work. It's about giving your immune system the information it needs to fight, no? Pero when you talk about the immune system, it protects you from infection, no? And there are two parts. Yung innate, yung ibig sabihin hindi mo kailangan ng ng priming, basta ginagawa na ng katawan mo to begin with. For example, in the immune system, your number one barrier is your skin. No, that's part of innate immunity. It protects you from the elements. And then you have the adaptive, na kumbaga, there are certain infections na kailangan ka muna ma-expose so that para makilala ng katawan ninyo yung kalaban at para masugpo niya. Yung analogy nga para sa war, no? So bago ka makapasok sa isang gyera, kailangan alamin mo kung sino yung kalaban ninyo. Kasi kung hindi, maaaring malaki yung mga casualties o na masusustain yung party ninyo kasi hindi nyo alam kung sino yung kalaban ninyo. And that's the same thing with infection. Kapag na-gain immunity sa isang virus na hindi pa na-expose yung isang tao to. So in this case, yung information na sinasabi ko dun sa kalaban takes the form of what we call antigens. Parang mga bahagi ito, mga parte-parte ng virus na china-chop-chop ng mga cells natin at ipinipresenta sa mga pinakakawal natin, yung mga sundalo natin sa katawan upang kapag dumating na yung mismong infection, ay masusugot nila kaagad. They'll be able to neutralize and protect us from that foreign invader. So the key here is introducing antigens, yung bits of information ng mismong virus or kung ano man ang gusto naming i-prevent sa tao para masanay ang katawan, kung sakaling ma-infect siya ng mismong kalaban, ay masusuko ito bago magkaroon ng malubhang sakit. That's the point of how vaccines are supposed to give your body immunity. It has to get the information and then process it to form yung antibody. And this is where we talk about yung antigen na yan. Ano bang part ng virus ang importante? Kasi this is what the virus looks like. No, mukha siyang crown, hence its name, corona crown, coronavirus. Kasi bilog siya at may mga nakalawit dito na mga matutulis na bahagi. Ito yung mga spike protein, and that's the one that we focus on, no? Yung parang pinakatulis ng crown niya. Kasi yung spike protein na yan, siya mismong kumakabit doon sa cells natin sa katawan para ma-infect sila, no? And in molecular biology, yung manner by which dumidikit siya has much to do with the shape, yung hugis, no? So yung hugis ng spike protein na yan, yung tulis ng corona, ay kasing hugis niya yung receptor doon sa cells natin sa katawan. Kaya dumidikit sila kasi magkasing hugis. You can think of it like a lock and a key, yung susi at kandado. Kasi 'di ba, may mismong hugis yung pinakasusi ninyo at dahil sa hugis na yan, it will work with specific locks. Kung magkaiba yung hugis na yan, hindi siya gagana, no? And it's the same thing with your virus and your cell. Yung mismong hugis ng spike protein ay kasing hugis ng receptor sa human cell natin, kaya kumakabit siya doon. Kaya nagkakaroon ng infection. So, the way that antibodies work, yung finorm ng katawan, ay base doon sa impormasyon na nakuha ng katawan ninyo doon sa tungkol sa hugis ng spike protein, ay gumawa siya ng antibody na kasing hugis din. So kumbaga parang decoy siya. Hindi na siya kakabit doon sa cell kung mag-infect, kakabit na lang siya sa antibody. And the effect of that is matatakpan lahat ng mga spike protein niya, hindi na siya makakadikit doon sa cell natin, neutralized na ang tawag namin dyan. And that's what we mean when we talk about antibodies, trying and how they're supposed to neutralize yung virus. Sumusunod siya doon sa pinakahugis ng spike protein at dahil magkahugis sila, ay kaya naman din niya pong sugpuin or i-block yung pinaka-receptor kasi magkasing hugis. So the shape is what's important about this, no? And the mutations are what cause these differences and these worries kasi each mutation introduces a change in that shape, yung hugis, no? But before I go on to that, I'll talk a little bit about vaccines. Kasi pansin mo, the strategy is pretty much the same. Mag-introduce tayo ng information that gives our body an idea, ano bang itsura ng kalaban? Ano ba yung hugis ng gusto nating i-neutralize, no? And there are different approaches to doing this. Just so you know, na all vaccines have their own ways. Wala namang right or wrong. They're just different approaches on how to do it. And they have their own pros and cons, no? And I'll talk about the different vaccines to you, no? So ito yung mga traditional methods of vaccines that we have, yung live attenuated or yung tinatawag na weakened, pinahina, no? You also have yung inactivated, yung patay, no? Hindi na siya buhay, patay. You have your toxoids, although I won't talk that much about toxoids kasi walang COVID vaccine na based on a toxoid. Pero I think a lot of you might have had experience with this kasi kapag nasugatan kayo at dinala kayo sa ER, sigurado ako tinanong kayo ng doktor ninyo, napabakuna na ba kayo ng tetano? And that's what they mean by this, no? Sa mga ibang tao doon mahilig din na magpa-Botox, no? Yung injection doon sa dito, that's technically a vaccine, though. That's the tetanus toxoid, no? But it's in a different amount, so it's not acting as a vaccine, it's actually acting as an agent. So ibang usapan yan, but that's what we mean by toxoids. So they're actual the toxin protein produced by yung mismong bacteria. And then you have yung protein subunit or mga parte-parte, no? So I'll go through each and every one of these vaccines para you're aware, no? There are different types. And we call these traditional kasi before the novel ones that we have now, this is how we used to make vaccines, no? So yung live attenuated, it's weakened. Ibig sabihin pinahina. This is the closest to the actual virus yung gusto mong kasi it's capable pa rin of replicating but not capable to cause the full disease. Now, you might wonder, but ganon, but hahayaan mo siya mag-replicate? Because the pros of live attenuated vaccines is that it provides long-lasting immunity. mahaba, minsan panghabang buhay siya kasi it's the closest to the actual infectious agent short of causing the actual disease. Kaya that's why the live attenuated the vaccines are very important, no? Bukod dyan, mabilis po yung pag-onset ng immunity. Usually within 7 days, you'll have at least 50% antibody immunity dun sa mga kasi it's very close to the actual or the thing that you want to protect. Now, the contraindication, since it's a weakened virus, hindi mo pwede ito ibigay sa mga taong mahina yung kanilang immune system kasi baka mamaya they will get the full disease and you don't want that, no? So, limited yung pag-use nito sa mga immunocompromised. We also don't recommend giving live attenuated kapag yung the person is expecting, ibig sabihin parang manganganak, no? May plans na magkaanak, no? Within a certain period. Tinatimingan yan. So those are some of the limits to giving a live attenuated. Bukod dyan, it's also a bit complicated to store kasi technically, you want to make sure na buhay siya, no? So there are specific storage conditions, mas stricto yung cold chain or yung pag-transfer or pag-transport pala ng you want to make sure na hindi siya mamamatay in transit or else hindi na effective yung vaccine. Ano yung mga examples na to? There are no COVID-19 vaccines that are live attenuated. Pero some of these, kapag kayo may mga anak kayo, and recently nagpabakuna kayo ng anak, baka you might have heard some of these. Yung measles, mumps, rubella, no? This one can prevent yung tigdas is one of the things this prevents, no? You give it usually as early as 6 to 9 months, no? And then the child will get a booster at 9 years or usually during their school aging. That's the last vaccine they will get, booster pala, and then after that full they have immunity for the rest of their lives. So dito sa mga live attenuated or at least for a long period of time, much longer. Polio is another one, no? Yung mga polio vaccine, this is given mukha siyang parang tubig na squirt sa bibig ng bata, no? So this one also provides long-lasting immunity. There's no need for a booster later in life kasi usually mababa na kasi yung incidence ng polio. So when you get yung polio vaccine, usually it's good for life. And then varicella, ito for chickenpox. Ang varicella vaccine hindi siya kasama sa expanded program, yung libre na kasama doon sa mga barangay health center. But you can give it as early as 1 year of age, and then it will protect yung child from and the adults also from getting chickenpox, and also the secondary form of chickenpox, yung zoster. So ito yung mga vaccines. They give lifelong protection kasi live attenuated sila. Now, the next step there is yung inactivated. Ibig sabihin, pinatay mo na siya. Hindi na capable of replicating yung virus na to, literal na bangkay siya. So para siyang yung sundalo natin, mahahanap nila yung isang bangkay ng kalaban, titingnan nila yung ano bang dala-dala nito, get information on it. That's the idea of that. Now, ang kagandahan nito, since it's dead, it's inactivated, you can give this na to mga people with weakened immune system. Mas hindi sila magkakaroon talaga ng sakit nito, no? But the cons, because it's dead, no, compared to your live attenuated viruses, it gives a slightly weaker immune response. Kung kaya yung mga inactivated, that's why sometimes you'll need boosters. If you've wondered bakit itong bakuna na to kailangan may booster, yung ito hindi, it has something to do with the way the vaccine was made. And for inactivated vaccines, this is one of the reasons why kailangan may mga booster shot. Kasi since it's a bit further away from the actual virus kasi dead na siya, then the immune response is not as good compared to yung live vaccine, but it's safer. That's what we're trying to put here. Yun ang mga pros and cons, balancing act yan. Now, because the immune response that is a bit weaker, usually ina-add nila ng mga tinatawag na adjuvant. Ang analogy dito parang pampalasa, it makes it more katakam-takam sa immune system para ay mas papansinin niya, no? And if you've ever wondered about some vaccines, bakit tinatanong nila kayo kung may allergies kayo to certain things, it's usually because of the adjuvants. In many cases, allergies or yung mga severe reactions, immediate allergic reactions to vaccines, it's not because of a reaction to the virus, but because of the adjuvant na nilagay nila. Kasi, remember, ang gusto natin is this information, yung antigen, ay mapansin ng immune system ninyo. So that's why yung mga people that get some side effects or they feel something from the vaccine, that's a sign that your immune system is responding to the vaccine and it's working. So that's it. It's just that some people, yung ibang adjuvants na to, ay mas malakas yung kanilang reaction, mas maselan sila dyan. So for example, sa flu vaccine, it uses an adjuvant called avidin. which is a protein that is similar to the one found in egg whites. Kung kaya bakit tinatanong kayo kung may allergies kayo sa egg, sa itlog, o sa chicken, that's the reason why they ask it. Kasi one of its adjuvants is avidin, which can be found in, or similar pala to the protein found in egg whites. Yeah. Now, some examples, you have your polio salk vaccine. Ito binibigay ito sa mga contraindicated, yung mga babies halimbawa na may immune disease, we can give in injected form para mas safe sa kanila. Rabies vaccine, I'm not sure if some of you here have yung mga aso kung nakagat na kayo, no? This is an example. Rabies vaccine, 5 years usually ang immunity na nag-grant na to. Afterwards, you need to get a booster shot. Hindi naman recommended regularly ang rabies unless yung mga veterinarians, they're given regular shots every 5 years. Kasi again, the immune response wanes after time kasi inactivated, dead nga yung binagay sa kanya. So they might need a booster. That's the reason why. Yung flu shot, that's another one every year. But the reason why it's every year is not only because it's an inactivated virus, it's also because the flu virus mutates very quickly. But that's just another example of being inactivated. And yung SARS-CoV vaccines, yes, there are some that are inactivated. So yung examples nito, yung SARS-CoV, yung Sinopharm, Sinovac, and then the one from India also, yung Covaxin. So those are all forms of inactivated virus vaccine. Okay. And then the last one for the traditional, yung protein subunit, yung mga parte. So this is yung mga parte na pinurify from, So if for example sa SARS-CoV, bukod sa, imbis na yung buong virus, yung pinaka-spike protein lang kinukuha, yung parte na yan. They can either be purified from a culture or they can be recombinant. Ibig sabihin niretoke. Nakuha namin from another virus or something, tapos tinweak namin. No? So that's what you mean by recombinant. Pero bale, it's just a part. It's not the whole thing. So therefore, yung pros niya, talagang it's one of the more safe ones compared to the other ones, no? Lalo na kapag weak ang immunity. And the other pro about it, unlike yung other two, which are technically viruses, na kailangan iprotektahan mo sila in transport, most protein subunit vaccines are more robust, no? Kaya nilang i-gawin na for long transit and transport. In fact, some vaccines that are made with protein subunits, they come in lyophilized powder form. So parang powdered siya. So when you need to use it, you just reconstitute it with water at gamitin. And then kapag kailangan i-store, you can put it, tsaka mo siya i-refrigerate. That's the beauty of yung mga protein subunit. So they're very good for yung mga, if you're gonna inoculate in a remote area na mahirap magdala ng mga and it's difficult to maintain yung cold chain. So yun yung maganda sa protein subunit. Now yung con, again, you're getting further and further away from yung mismong virus kasi that you're trying to protect against. So it follows na the immune response is weaker compared to the other two, no? Relatively speaking. That's why you have to do multiple shots or boosters, no? And then also they use more adjuvants. So mas madami pa nga yung adjuvants na kailangan para mas papansinin kasi parte na lang siya, no? It's not the whole thing. Also, since yung protein subunit is dependent on yung hugis ng mismong ng protein, if there are any changes or mutations that occur dun sa hugis na yan, these protein subunit vaccines may be more susceptible to being affected by them compared to the other types. Kasi whole vaccine yan. So you have a lot of different sources or parts of information of the virus. Ito isang parte lang. So kapag nagbago yan, baka mamaya mas may hirapan yung antibodies mag-latch onto that particular target. Okay? So yung mga examples na to, Hepatitis B Vaccine, no? Part to ng regular vaccine sa mga bata. And then usually, and this prevents what we call vertical transmission, no? Ang pinaka-common na transmission of Hep B in the Philippines is actually vertical from mother to child, no? So giving the vaccine to the child close to birth is actually what helps prevent yung spread ng Hep B kasi it's spread via blood transfusion. Now, yung mga boosters for Hep B is not necessary for most adult people kasi yung casual exposure to Hep B is very low. Mas mataas yung exposure to yung mga healthcare workers. So sila yung mga recommended for Hep B vaccination bago pa sila ma-deploy sa duty kasi baka needle prick injury or mga ibang splash, yung mga thing exposed sa infectious na blood. Kaya yung Hep B vaccine routinely given sa mga sa mga healthcare workers. Pneumococcal, no, I'm sure you've heard of this one. Yung tinatawag na lifelong sa pneumonia, yes, binibigay yan sa matatanda. Recommendations 65 and above, lifelong. Pero actually, if you give this below the age of 65, it has ang expected immunity is around 5 to 10 years only. It's just that, again, and this is why we do studies on specific populations. They found out kapag 65 and above, binigay yung pneumococcal, they can have it for the rest of their life. Maganda pa rin yung immunity up until their later ages, no, later in life. Pero yung mga bata, for some reason, mas nag-wane yung vaccine efficacy, yung antibodies after 5 to 10 years, kung kaya they recommend every 5 to 10 years din yung pneumococcal vaccine but sa mga less than 65. And then there's also meningococcal. No? So this one, it's not that common here, but there have been outbreaks, like there was one in Baguio in 2011. And this is usually in mga closed quarters. So in the Philippines, hindi to routinely binibigay, pero binibigay sa mga sundalo natin, sa mga living in the barracks to prevent. So that's just, I'm giving an example of how we identify high-risk groups, that sila yung mga binavaccinate natin. Now in the context of COVID-19, that's also something that, it's a discussion, sino yung mga high-risk groups. And sa mga protein subunit COVID vaccine, ito yung mga Novavax, yung mga ganun yun. That one is a protein subunit vaccine. And now all of these kasi are developed using mga traditional techniques. And what that means is, talagang you have to grow the virus, purify the virus, and then manufacture it and make sure maganda yung quality and before you roll out. Now, normally that would take years to do, no? But that's why yung mga bagong versions na to, they were developed to answer that need. Kasi if everyone were to follow the traditional method of making, it would take a lot of money, a lot of resources, and it would take a long time. Which is why if you look at yung mga traditionally made na vaccines, like yung Sinopharm, Sinovac, and yung Covaxin na Camellia, they're able to make this India and China because they have the resources and the manpower. They literally brute forced it. No? Kumbaga, you ask, how are they able to make that vaccine in a short amount of time? Kasi madami talagang mga Chinese. They have a lot of resources and a lot of labs, and they're able to pull off something like that. That's not something na kaya ng mga ibang countries, much smaller countries like the UK and America, for example, which is why they utilize newer technologies which were in development at the time. It's just that now that there was the pandemic, they were able to focus it para may ilabas. No? And these vaccine technologies were actually used to treat cancer. No, just on a side note, yung new information coming out on the treatment of cancer is almost like creating cancer vaccines. No? And that same technology was applied to certain infectious diseases. And with the advent of yung COVID-19 pandemic, ay iginamit din nila yung teknolohiya na yan dun sa vaccine. Kaya we have these new COVID-19 vaccines using that new technology. So talk about yung mRNA vaccine. Ito, mainit-init to. A lot of people know kaagad when you hear mRNA, Pfizer, BioNTech, no? Tsaka yung Moderna. Yes, those are mRNA vaccines. And the way they work is, di ba sinabi ko, to make vaccines, you have to culture it, and then you have to purify the virus, and then hihiwalay mo yung virus na yun, inactivate mo and everything. This one gets rid of all of those steps. Kasi remember, ano yung goal ng vaccine sa immunity? You want to introduce information or yung mga antigen ng virus into the body para yun yung magsisilbing informasyon dun sa immune system ninyo. That's the point. Now, the mRNA vaccines, they work by taking advantage of your own body's cells, no? So i-introduce nila itong mRNA, which is basically like an instruction sheet on how to build the spike protein of the virus para yung mismong cells nyo sa katawan ang gagawa ng spike protein. So it's shortcuts. You don't have to culture virus or anything. Yung mismong cells mo sa katawan ang gagawa ng antigen na magiging basis po ng pag-form ng antibodies against the disease. So that's the idea. And the pros of this is, yun nga, it's much faster to develop. And if there are variants that come out, it's easier to modify then. Kasi if you think of the traditional method, you'll have to culture a whole new batch of with the new variants and everything. It's a lot more expensive and labor intense. Pero dito sa mga mRNA, mo-modify mo ng konti para tumugba doon sa bagong hugis ng spike protein, and then you have yourself an updated vaccine. That's the nice thing about it. The cons, ang mRNA, yung ito, di ba mukha siyang suklay? Tapos parang exposed tong mga ngipin sa dulo. That's the problem with mRNA. They're very fragile proteins. No? Proteins. They're very fragile molecules. So in order to transport these, they had to develop a specific lalagyan, yung mag-encapsulate sa kanya. Yan ang nagpamahal dito sa kanya. And at the same time, the logistics are what make it also more expensive. So to produce the vaccine, technically it's cheaper, but the logistics and the packaging involved to get this to other people ang nagpapamahal dito sa vaccine nito because they degrade easily. And because of that, they're not suitable in areas na medyo mahirap ang rollout, or you're anticipating mga brownout, for example, or they don't have the storage necessary, yung -80 na kailangan. Kasi bukod dyan, what people have to understand, we do not produce the vaccines as single-dose vials. Kung sanay ko yung sa flu vaccine, di ba, para isang glass vial, tapos ginigay ganyan. No, because they have to make so many of these vaccines, they prepare it as single vials na you draw from. So, and because of the way that this vaccine is made, halimbawa, you make a vial that's good for 100 doses. When you take that out and you have to use it, siguraduhin ninyo meron din 100 people ang magpapabakuna. Kasi kapag hindi ka umabot sa 100, kung ano mga natira doon sa vial na yan, kailangan ng itapon. That's why the rollout strategy for these type of vaccines is very crucial in order to make sure you don't have wastage and to ensure also that the efficacy that was promised by it is maintained. Kasi di bale na effective nga yung vaccine, kung palpak naman yung pag-deliver, parang wala lang din. Okay, so that's what you have to remember. So the technical logistics, the logistics involved and the technicalities behind it are what make it a bit harder to use. No? And then you have your viral vector vaccines. Yung mga examples nito, ito yung mga Gamaleya, Sputnik, yung sa Russian. No? You have your AstraZeneca and your Johnson & Johnson. So those are examples of viral vector. And the way it works is, ang analogy ko dito, para siyang, well, war example na naman. Di ba yung mga aerial bomber, yung mga aeroplano, may dala-dala silang bomba. Yun. So you can think of the viral vector as your airplane na nagdadala ng payload. The payload here is the genetic information that also serves to tell your cells how to make yung protein ng target niya. Pero since naka-encapsulate sa plane, it's actually more durable. Yan ang pro niya. Kumpara dun sa mRNA, mas durable. So it lasts longer and the logistics are much simpler. You don't need -80 to ship these. Ganda siya. And it uses also a viral vector. So ibig sabihin, you don't need to use adjuvants. The vectors that they use here are by their nature, kapansin-pansin ng immune system. So they will be noticed kaagad and then mas madali silang mag-inject kumbaga ng genetic material into the cells of interest. But that said, yung drawbacks niya, because it's noticeable by your body, your body can also create antibodies against the vector. So it's possible for your body to attack the vaccine, which is why it's very important for these type of designs na vaccines na to limit the number of times you have to give it. Because of that, yung Johnson & Johnson, that's one of the reasons why that one, the single dose, is very attractive. Kasi especially for a viral vector vaccine, mas maganda, mas mainam na kung mabawasan mo yung number of times you have to give it, that will increase the probability that that will decrease the probability that your body will create antibodies against the vaccine. Now, that said, there was a recent update sa AZ, yung AstraZeneca, na they recommended increasing the time period. So the first dose, they said maganda yung results kapag inibigay yung second dose at the 12th week. I'm assuming it's because they found out that any antibodies that might have been formed against the vector would have waned by that time. So mas maganda yung overall outcomes ng mga nakakuha ng ganong kalaki yung agwat dun sa pag-dose. But just so you know, that's how those ones work. Ito yung mga bagong vaccines. Now, that's all nice and good. So you have traditional vaccines and we have had a lot of experience with them, and then we have these new ones na very promising, maganda din yung resulta nila dun sa mga trials. But we go now to the main question, yung variants. What will the variants do to them? Okay, so let's talk about variants. No, so mutation, variant, lineage, you have a lot of terms for them. Now, mutation, we're talking about yung mismong hugis. Paulit-ulit ko sinasabi yung hugis na to. In this case, we're looking at the spike protein kasi siya yung mismong kumakabit doon. Kung magkaroon ng mutation, that causes a change in the shape. Nagkakaroon ng hugis, no? Pagbabago dun sa hugis. No? And when you look at multiple mutations, it creates a profile, no? And that profile is what you call your variant, no? If you think about it in terms of a person, no? Parang halimbawa, mukha ko, meron akong itsura base sa hugis ng aking ilong, bibig, mata, kilay. When you put that all together, it becomes a certain variant. Parang yung pagkakakilanlan doon sa virus na yan. That's what I mean by variant, no? But in order for us to understand, to put it into perspective, we classify that into lineages. Ang lineage naman, parang family tree na yan. Kanino siyang anak ni ganito? Sino siyang anak sa tuhod sa ganyan? Kasi maaaring lahat kayo Pinoy. No? Variant natin Pinoy. Pero yung lineage, hindi naman pwede sabihin lahat Pinoy. They have different lineages based on the family. And it gives us an idea kung saan galing yung virus na yan. So in terms of mutation, it's an event. And we designate them by this. So just so that if you encounter them, alam nyo kaagad anong tinutukoy dito. So mutations are usually written as numbers flanked by letters. So N501Y, E484K mutation yan. So ibig sabihin, yung pagbabago yan sa hugis ang pinag-uusapan dyan. Ang variant, we're talking about effects, no? For example, ano ibig sabihin ng UK variant, no? It's a variant of concern because clinically mas nakakahawa siya. And that's why it's a variant of concern, no? Kasi there can be many different types of variants out there, but not all of them are concerning. So that's why when we talk about variants, at least in the context yung nababasa ninyo sa balita, ang tinutukoy natin is the variant of concern. Kasi someone asked me, how many variants are there? Sabi ko, hundreds. There are a lot, but not all of them are important. So yung importante, yan ang tinutukoy natin when you hear the word variant in the media or when you're reading papers. Kasi ang mas importante sa atin yung mga concerning. So when you talk about variants, you're talking about the effect. No? So halimbawa dito, UK variant. And when you talk about lineage, you're talking about the history. And saan siya pupunta? So saan nanggaling tong virus na to? Saan ang pinanggalingan nila? Sino yung tatay niya? Sino yung nanay niya? Parang ganun ang pinag-uusapan when you're talking about lineage. Okay? So again, mutations cause changes in the shape, yung hugis. Kasi yan ang magdidikta yung mga kung ano yung mga critical mutations that can affect yung yung either the response clinically or yung effect ng virus. So again, kasi pag nagbago yung hugis, magbabago yung way that the antibodies can attach themselves to the spike protein kapag yan ang nag-mutate. And I used that analogy before para siyang how you recognize someone in terms of their face, no? But just so you know, ang antibody naman, hindi naman siya set in stone na kapag nagbago ka agad yung hugis, wala na siyang choice. Thankfully, antibodies have some wiggle room, no? Kumbaga, it's not so much na tinutukoy mo isang tao, ganito yung itsura niya, isa lang talaga yan. But it can get it as a general idea. Kumbaga, kung yung hugis na mukhang Pinoy, edi pasok siya doon sa criteria. So any slight variations doon sa hugis ng molecule because of mutations, maaari pa rin pong maging effective pa rin yung antibody to identify them. But as more and more variations occur, as more and more mutations occur, steadily you start moving to territory na siya pa rin bang tinutukoy ng ano na to? Kasi halimbawa dito sa kaliwa, yung dalawang to, Asian more or less ang tingin nila, no? So baka your antibodies will still have an effect. But at some point, magmumukha na siyang puti and you're not exactly sure anymore, is it the same kalaban? And the same thing will happen with your antibodies. That's why it's hard to predict. And if you've been wondering, yung sagot ng mga dalubhasa kung ano yung effect ng antibodies, ng variants antibodies, and we're not exactly sure, this is what we mean. Kasi all we do know is as mutations occur, as the image, yung hugis ay palayo ng palayo dun sa originating one, we do know that unti-unti rin maapektuhan. And that's the reason why importante na masugpo ka agad yung virus. Kasi the more it's allowed to mutate in the population, the more likely that the vaccines will become less effective. So as early as now, habulan talaga siya. If you can immunize people and get the antibodies to target it while it still looks Asian, then the better. Parang ganon. Now, ito yung mga variants of concern na tinutukoy ko. No? In at least so far, there are 3. No? Yung tinatawag na UK variant, South African, and Brazilian. And when we're talking about lineages, we utilize what's called the pangolin assignment. So, yun yung parang nakikita yung letra na B117, B351, P1, yung ganon. Kasi we want to avoid the stigma attached to putting names. Also because not all Brazilian variants are of concern. Kasi halimbawa, there's a Brazilian variant, yung B1128, iba siya doon sa P1. So yung P1 yung concerning. Yung B1128, which is also from Brazil, ay hindi naman concerning yon. So that's what we mean. So we want to avoid as much as possible using the location terms. Pero yun nga, just so you're aware. No? But what does it mean? What do these different variants mean? So halimbawa, yung UK variant, all of them actually, they're concerning because they all exhibit a mutation which makes it easier na makahawa. Mas nakakahawa siya. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Yung ibig sabihin is, mas madikit siya. No? Yung hugis niya, it's even closer to the receptor sa cells, kung kaya, mas koonti na virus ang kailangan para ma-infect yung isang tao. Hindi ibig sabihin na parang ganun siya na no. It means you need less amount of time, less amount of exposure to get infected because you need less amount of virus to get infected. That's what it means, no? And then yung UK variant, and then yung South African, yung B1351, and yung P1, yung Brazilian, they also exhibit what's called antibody escape. Sila yung mga napapansin nila, this has a mutation sa spike protein na maaari yung mga antibodies that are formed from previous infection hindi na masyado effective sa kanya. And that's where they raise the concern na baka yung antibodies formed from yung mga vaccine might not be as effective against these variants. No? Now, there's a new report coming out. The UK variant has increased mortality, although we have to wait for further studies confirming this. Kasi yung study na to was based on indirect analysis. But that said, it's all the more reason why we have to be concerned about them, that we have to decrease infections and also have to promote yung vaccination because, and I will talk about it later, the importance of vaccines and why you shouldn't just be so concerned about efficacy. Now, there's also a new variant that was reported by us here at the Philippine Genome Center. It's designated P3, the Philippine variant. We first documented it the end of February and we reported it sa March 6, no, sa journal na to. And it was discovered due to a spike of infections that were located in the Central Visayas area. So you can see here it started at the beginning of the new year na nagkaroon ng mga cases na nagsaspike. And true enough, when we identified doon, there was a variant that was somewhat different, no, compared to those in the database that we found. And this is what we mean when we look at it, no. So just to help you, kasi medyo confusing to. If you look yung pahaba, this is basically the extent of the genome. The different colors show you the different genes, no. And the vertical shows you the expression, gaano kadami yung expression ng particular mutation na yan. And then the 3 bars on the bottom, yung parang pahabang to, with the pink, the blue, and the green, those are if you compare it to the other variants. So the top line is your Brazilian, the P1. The blue one is your UK, yung 117. And then the green one at the bottom, the 1351, is your South African. And you'll notice, in terms of the ones that they have similarities, no, the genes that are the same, you have this N501Y here. So all 3 of the variants have it, no? Pati rin tong Philippine variant, the P3, also has it. This is what confers increased infectivity. No, mas nakakahawa yung ganitong virus na to. And that's what they mean by that, no? It also has P681H, which is found in the UK variant, no? Also, this is also increases the infectivity. So, yung in terms of kasing nakakahawa, it para siyang it's similar to yung UK variant based on the genes alone. Now, bukod doon, meron din siyang E484K. This one's important. You see it in the Brazilian and the South African. And itong mutation na to is what confers the resistance to antibodies. No, that's the one na meron din itong variant na to. Now, bukod dyan, there are certain mutations in other areas na hindi kita. Like, for example, this one, B3681E, P4715L, yan, na nakikita na wala doon sa ibang variant, and that's what makes it unique compared to them, no? May mga features na meron itong variant natin na hindi natatagpuan doon sa iba, and that's what makes it a unique variant. And because it has the E484K, the N501Y, these concerning mutations, na designate po siya as a variant of under investigation. Hindi pa siya of concern kasi hindi pa gaano kalaganap, no? It's not that widespread yet, but it has the potential to. That's why it is under investigation, no? This is a phylogenetic tree that just shows you yung origins niya is unique in itself, no? Kasi baka mamaya sasabihin ng mga tao, galing yan sa variant na Brazilian na pumasok tapos naging, well, yeah, it comes from the B1128, yung Brazilian na hindi concerning, yung regular, that you're able to but it's unique, more unique from the orange one. So itong Philippine variant early on, it's the red one here. Itong orange, that's your Brazilian. The P1, the one that's concerning, variant of concern. You see they're in different locations. Basically what that means is they are unique. So they are similar, but they are also not similar. No, they didn't come from the same source. So just so you understand, kasi there are some reports that are confusing when they say nagaling sa Brazilian na, they make it seem like it came from this variant of concern. No, they came from a similar Brazilian, but they mutated independently of one another. But this is still developing. We're also understanding there are other pathways that have occurred. And as we sequence more and more samples, we get a better idea of paano na lumabas tong variant na to. But what we do know is dito talaga sa Central Visayas una na locate and nag-start yung mutation na to. So homegrown talaga siya dito sa Central Visayan region. And with the information that we've gathered, we're able to create network maps that give us an idea of how it spread to the certain areas. And I won't go into deep detail on how to interpret this, but just so you know, this gives us an idea of how certain cases, in this case, this is the P3, and how they're found across Visayas, how they relate to other cases found in other areas. Like for example, itong central node na to, it looks to be the common na pinanggalingan ng mga kaso, and there are certain nanganak na yung kaso. So yung as the nodes go further and further away, yun yung parang panganganak ng kaso as they move. So this is our way of monitoring how it's moving through the population, and certain areas, for example, itong mas malaking area na to gives us an idea of these cases might be the one to look into kasi baka super spreader event ito. No, and that's how the Epidemiology Bureau is able to utilize the information we generate in order to target possible areas of weakness in our containment measures. Kasi despite there being all of these variants, the management remains the same. No, there is no evidence to suggest that these variants cause increased severity of disease. However, since mas madali sa makahawa, you have to reinforce the existing measures of minimum public health standards. So that's why by identifying mga weak spots, that can help us to reinforce. Kasi again, the management remains the same. People just have to be more cognizant, mas aware sa kanila na may potential na baka mahawa sila kapag nasa labas sila. So please don't be complacent kapag lumabas kayo. Wear your mask, maintain social distancing. Kung maaari, kung lalabas kayo, ay siguraduhin ninyo na planado na para ma-minimize yung amount of time that you're outdoors. And if you're going to work, make sure, if you have to report to work, make sure maganda yung ventilasyon doon sa loob ng building, and that you guys maintain appropriate work hours and also yung mga distancing. Lalo na kapag kumakain kayo, huwag kayo harap-harap kumain, those type of things. So, yun ang mga take-home messages na to. Now, this is also just to show you yung sinabi ko a while ago, that there's already evidence showing that yung virus natin is appearing in biosurveillance of other countries. So the common lineage here, for example, na itong gray na to sa Central Visayas, and how it moved in Cebu, and how certain sequences that were submitted sa international database can be linked to cases that came from our country. So the Philippines is in a unique position kasi kasama po sa mga export natin, yung mga OFW natin. So this is of concern, syempre, na bukod sa internal natin na problema in containing the virus, we also have to be aware of the repercussions this has in our standing internationally. Kasi syempre ang ayaw natin, yung mga OFW natin ay baka mamaya hindi sila tatanggapin sa mga ibang bansa dahil dito sa variant na tong gusto nilang i-protect yung kanilang citizen against. And we can't blame them for that, no? Which is why it's very important for us to be aware and to monitor and track this disease para we were able to stop it as much as we can. So what can we do about it, no? How do we stop variants from spreading? Well, it's to create herd immunity. And yung term na to, what this means is, babakunahan mo yung mga tao para protektahan yung mga hindi pa nabakunahan. So itong image na to, it's a really good example na halimbawa dito yung mga yung pula, yun yung mga may sakit, and yung mga blue, yung mga walang sakit pero hindi pa nabakunahan. At dahil dikit sila, eventually magsispread siya. Lahat ng natatamaan ng pula ay magiging pula din, mag-infection. Pero if you can increase the number of people vaccinated, yung mga dilaw, then para nakakabuo kayo ng para nakapalibot sa kanya na hindi na nakadikit dun sa blue at mako-contain mo yung mismong infection. And again, mutations occur as the virus is allowed to spread in the population. So to prevent that from happening, mas higit na kailangan talaga na ma-vaccinate as many people as possible so that you can stem the spread of the infection. By doing that, you can lower the chances that a mutation occurs, and by lowering the chances of a mutation occurring, you can lower the chances of a variant occurring that can affect the vaccine. So talagang habulan siya. As much as possible, we should be prioritizing na mabakunahan as many people as possible. Now, we'll talk about efficacy. No, kasi ito yung mga hot topics. Sabi naman, effective niya ba? And bakit yung ibang vaccines mas effective sa iba? Now, that's where but before I go into that, yes, vaccines are effective. It's been shown historically. It's not a new thing. When we first introduced yung vaccines for smallpox and about, talagang bumagsak. You see it here, boom. Polio din, nung na-introduce yung vaccine, boom, bumagsak. And in the case of smallpox, this is an example of what's called an eradicable disease. There are certain diseases kasi that are candidates for eradication. So if you're to ask me, polio is another one that's a candidate for eradication. But if you're to ask me, ang COVID-19 ba is a candidate for eradication? The answer, mukhang not likely. What it is a candidate for containment. Ibig sabihin, we'll be able to learn how to contain it in a manner that is manageable and we can live with it. Katulad ng sa flu, no? Because it's not a good candidate for eradication. But in order to get to the containment, you need to stop the infections. And one of the most important tools, powerful tools to achieve that is through vaccination. No? Now, vaccines are developed in this framework. No? The average time actually to make a vaccine and to release it is around 8 to 10 years. The fastest before that was 4 years. So the mere fact that we're able to get the COVID-19 vaccine in the span of 1 year is actually quite impressive. No? And nagawa nila ito kasi they started overlapping certain parts of the vaccine approval process, and they accelerated the approval of certain clinical trials. No? So just to give you an idea, ang phase 1, that's your safety trial. So we give this to people without the disease at minamonitor natin for mga severe side effects or mga untoward effects that will be a result of that. So a lot of vaccine candidates can fail at this phase, hindi na sila makakahusad. No? This is and then yung phase 2 is yung dosage. No? Tinitingnan yung safety in terms of, and this is where they determine kasi how many doses, kung gaano kalaki yung agwat bago makakuha ng booster, ilang bang booster, so that's determined in phase 2. And walang makakapasa ng phase 3 until they pass phase 1 and 2. Those are important. So phase 1 and 2 is your safety. All vaccines that pass this have to be proven safe. So lahat ng nakapasa nun, safe na sila for use in the population. Now 3 is your efficacy. No? You look at it in terms of sa mga nabakunahan at yung mga binigyan ng placebo. Ibig sabihin it's not the actual, it's blank, no? And then you follow them up and see ilan ba sa kanila ang naano. That's the efficacy trial. So you're looking at how it's able to prevent the disease as well as other outcomes. And this is what I mean. So we'll talk about vaccine efficacy and why medyo it's a bit misleading. No, when you look at vaccine efficacy across the board, iba-iba, it's very tempting to start making comparisons. But you have to understand these are made with very specific populations and the conclusions of which you can only apply to those populations. So it's literally like comparing apples and oranges. Kapag tiningnan mo yung 95% ng Pfizer, halimbawa, at kinumpara mo dun sa 70% ng AstraZeneca. Kasi magkaiba yung kanilang setups. But even before we go into that, you have to understand what you mean by efficacy. No? Ang ibig sabihin kasi ng efficacy is the ability of the vaccine to prevent the disease it's meant to prevent. Ibig sabihin, doon sa mga binigyan ng vaccine, ilan yun na hindi na-infect. And to put it into perspective, halimbawa, 100 ang na-vaccinate, 100 got the placebo. If 10 got infected sa placebo, 10 got infected sa vaccine group, ibig sabihin, efficacy mo is 0. No? But if it's 10 sa placebo and 5 dun sa vaccine arm, that's 50%. No? That's what it means. That's what efficacy. Kasi your endpoint that you're measuring here is yung how many people na prevent na infect. But vaccines have more endpoints than just efficacy. No? There are also, you're looking at disease severity, shortening the duration, and decreasing in mortality. So, and this is a lot of times glossed over by a lot of people. No, meron akong experience na to, na I had a patient na pumunta sa ER, 87-year-old lola siya, no? Dinala siya dahil inuubo-ubo siya, tapos meron din siyang lagnat. When I checked the x-ray, naku, ang pangit, puting-puting yung baga niya. Hindi ako makapaniwala, nagsasalita siya na parang wala lang. She didn't even need oxygen. Pero sabi ko, Nay, i-admitan muna kita for observation kasi I'm worried baka mag-deteriorate kayo. Nasa floor siya, I visited her, okay pa rin siya, parang walang nangyari. Tanong ko sa kanya, Nay, nabakunahan ba kayo? Sabi niya, oo, 2 months ago. Kaya sabi ko, Nay, alam mo, tingin ko kapag hindi ka nabakunahan, tsak na sa ICU kayo. And that's also what you have to understand about vaccines. When they don't prevent disease, they can, 1, lessen the severity, hindi kasing lubha yung sakit. 2, they can shorten the duration, mas maging maikli. And 3, they can lessen mortality. Mas mababa yung chance ang mamamatay ka. And this is also what has to be stressed. In the context of a pandemic, all 3 of these are important in stemming the pandemic. Hindi lang bukod sa hindi kayo ma-infect, but also mababawasan yung severity, yung lubha ng sakit, yung duration ng illness, and yung risk na mamatay kayo. Kasi of all of the vaccines, regardless of their efficacy, they were all proven to prevent mortality and decrease the risk of severe. Lahat sila, they showed na ganon nga. So hindi siya black or white na all or nothing na dapat it should prevent. No, there's still benefit in the form of lessening the severity, shortening the duration, decreasing mortality. Paulit-ulit ko yan. And let's take it home even further. Let's look at flu. Did you know yung flu vaccine efficacy last year recorded dun sa kaso is only 44%, no? So, yung 44 baka sasabihin niyo, grabe naman yan, ang baba, ba't pa niyan binibigay? And that's where you have to ask the question, what does 44% mean in the context of reducing infections? And this is a study that they use the mathematical model to predict, to show what that 44% means. And para maintindihan nyo to, yung graph sa pinaka-left, no, 19, this is looking if a vaccine is 19% effective, ibig sabihin halos not very good. Yung 44% and 60. And they showed na even at the lowest levels of herd immunity, ibig sabihin not that many people vaccinated, a 44% efficacy means a decrease in over 75% of cases, even at the lower level of immunity. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng 44%. Now, I'm not saying mag-settle tayo sa 44. Kasi if you look at the 60, halos less than 1 million yung mga infections na na-prevent. But if you can reduce the number of infections by 75% in the context of a pandemic, that is a big deal. And that's one of the reasons why you shouldn't get too hung up with the efficacy of na not as low. Why you shouldn't get hung up na parang paiba-iba or you want to go for the best efficacy. Kasi another thing, I forgot to mention this, ang 95% efficacy halimbawa, that is in the context of yung population na mineasure nila. Ibig sabihin, in that population na 95 na tinest nila, 95% yung protected. That does not mean you have a 95% chance of protection. Kasi kapag ikaw na-inject ka yan, pero you go around and start kissing everyone you see, your risk is still associated na baka mahawa ka because you are exposing yourself continuously. No? That's what we mean. So you have to put the efficacy in context. Now, bukod sa incidence of infection, severity, which is measured in hospitalization, gaano karami na ospital dahil sa sakit, nag-decrease din by nearly 75%, kahit 44% effective. Death, ganon din. Malaki din yung effect niya, which is why that's the point. True efficacy, especially in the context of the COVID-19 vaccines, can only be determined once more people are vaccinated and we start following up and checking ilan ba yung nahawa kahit nabigyan ng vaccine. That's the only way we can do the true efficacy, not based it on the clinical trials alone. Kasi very small pa rin yung mga trials nila. Instead, ang focus ng mga tao should be on the other aspects of the vaccines, the safety. Dapat well-documented yung mga adverse effects, and they are. And there are also guidelines to make sure na monitor yung mga tao for any adverse effects that come about. Logistical compliance. Di bale na effective ang vaccine mo, kapag palpak yung rollout ninyo, baliwala yan lahat. You have to ensure the longevity and the preservation of the vaccine to ensure that the efficacy that's reflected in the studies is what's given to the patients when they receive it in their arm. And lastly, the rollout strategy. Kailangan natin intindihin na not all versions of the vaccine, kaya I discussed with you the types, are suitable in all situations. Medyo blessed tayo dito sa NCR that we have access to a lot of the more advanced technologies and we have all of the resources available para mas madaling ilabas ang mga vaccine. Pero doon sa mga kapatid natin sa mga far-flung areas or mga areas that are harder to reach like the Cordilleras areas or yung mga indigenous tribes there's a different rollout strategy and different types of vaccines that are available and more appropriate for them that can help them gain the benefits then of these vaccines. So yan yung dapat focus natin, not so much on the efficacy. Kasi again, that's only one component of the vaccine. Importante din po yung ability of the vaccine to shorten the disease, to make it less severe and to decrease your risk of dying. Kasi in the context of a pandemic, yan ang importante. Nagre-reklamo kayo na punong-puno yung hospital, then the vaccines will help you kasi magiging mild yung sakit. Hindi na kailangan pumunta sa hospital yung mga tao. Kung nagre-reklamo kayo, marami nag-i-infect. If you're short on the duration of disease, the chances of someone spreading that disease is much, much lower kasi konti na lang yung period of time na infectious sila. That's what it means. This is why it's important to not just focus on efficacy. Marami pa pong endpoints na importante na ibibigay ng mga vaccine. Kasi again, ang habol natin is herd immunity. And just to put it into context, what is the herd immunity in terms of percent population na kailangan para ma-reduce yung number of infections to a rate that's controllable or considered contained? Ang calculation nun is 67%. What that means in the context of the Philippines po is around 70 million people. Sa ngayon po, hindi pa tayo umaabot sa 1 million people na vaccinated. And ilan na lang po ang linggo na natira sa year. To reach 70 million by the end of the year, that means we have to be vaccinating upwards of 3 million people a week. So that's where the pressure should be placed. It's the effective rollout of our vaccines to ensure that as many people can be vaccinated as soon as possible. Kasi in order to prevent the proliferation of mga variants that can make the vaccines not as effective, kailangan maunahan siya. Yan ang ibig sabihin dito sa herd immunity. Now, I'll answer some frequently asked questions about vaccines kasi marami mga pag-alinlangan ng mga tao. Understandable naman yan. But I hope dito sa mga shinare ko, para may background kayo, you get a better understanding and not be so afraid of vaccines, no? Because it's not science juice. There's science behind it, but there's a reasoning behind it, no? And we'll answer yung mga frequently asked questions. Isa, safe ba? Safe ba ang vaccine? Yes, it's safe, no? Again, sinabi ko, mga phase 1 and 2 trials for safety, isinalalim sa lang lahat sa striktong pag-aaral for their safety and their efficacy. At lahat ng vaccines na pumapasa dito sa Pilipinas ay kailangan muna pumasa doon sa FDA, sa US, or sa EMA, EU, or any of the equivalents. So safety is the first and foremost for any of the vaccines before they can gain any form of emergency use authorization around the world. May side effects ba ang vaccine? Good question. Yes, meron pong mga side effects, usually mga mild. Pero remember what I said, we are introducing a part of the illness to emulate it para kapag nagkaroon ng mismong sakit sa'yo ay handa ka na, you know how to do it. So it's understandable that the side effects ay dulot ng mismong mekanismo ng bakuna, no? So in fact, yung mga tao na nagkakaroon ng side effects is a better idea or indicator for me that napansin ng katawan nyo yung mismong bakuna, no? Now, there are some reports coming out na yung mga newer vaccines like yung mRNA vaccine, yung Mrna, and yung mga Pfizer and yung mga adenovirus like yung mga Gamaleya, yung mga Johnson & Johnson. These ones, since they use yung mismong cells sa katawan ninyo para gumawa ng antigen, the tendency for getting side effects is a bit more common kasi sometimes you can't account for gaano kadaming ginagawa ng katawan ng tao. So minsan mga tao, bibong-bibo yung cells nila, ang dami nilang pinroduce na antigen, ayun tuloy, talagang halatang-halata yung side effects. But they are still very mild, they are manageable if necessary. Now, just so, because what you have to remember, kung takot kayo sa side effects, mas malaki po yung cost of disease kung mahawak kayo ng mismong COVID. So, di bali na makaranas kayo ng konting lagnat, sakit ng ulo, o kaya sakit doon sa mismong site na kung saan kayo in-inject. Mas mabuti pa yan kaysa baka ma-hospital kayo doon sa COVID-19. And yan, meron pong bawal mabigyan ng bakuna, no? Sa ngayon, there's only one contraindicated, two groups pala na contraindicated. Kung meron na kayong severe reaction, which is a severe allergic reaction, ibig sabihin within a few minutes of administering the medication, you experience difficulty of breathing, heaviness ng chest, or kaya numbing ng pamamanhid dito sa mga dulo, sa mga fingertips. If you have those ones, kaya may on-site na they monitor you and they can give you epinephrine. If you had any of that to any one vaccine, automatically contraindicated. You can't get the second dose if there's a second one. Ibang vaccine na lang ang kailangan ibigay sa inyo. And also, if you have known allergies to any of these two components, polyethylene glycol at polysorbate. Ang polyethylene glycol, ginagamit to sa mga ibang labatiba. No? So tingnan nyo yung ingredients ng labatiba. No? Usually, yung people that have had this, yung mga na-colonoscopy, no? If they had any reactions dun sa labatiba na ginamit na doon, baka you're allergic to polyethylene glycol. No? Hindi yung castor oil, iba yan. It's a different ginagamit for that one. Polysorbate naman, they use that sa mga vascular grafts. No? Yung mga may dialysis, nilalagyan nila ng graft dito sa may kamay. Halimbawa, kapag nagkaroon ng localized skin graft reaction, yon, baka mami hindi kayo pwede. yung mga the ones that use these type of adjuvants, usually yung mga ano yan, yung mga protein subunit vaccines. I have to review which ones have these ones. Pero they will ask you beforehand ano yung mga allergies nila. So it's good for you to know if you're allergic to any of these two para maka-double check sila kung pwede yung vaccine yan sa'yo. But of course, for all, because this is a mass vaccination effort, all people are recommended, kasama to sa guidelines, na 30 minutes observation bago kayo umalis. Kasi that's when all of the severe adverse reactions, yung allergic reactions can occur. Beyond that, very unlikely na allergic kayo sa any of the components in the vaccine. So that's ano. But afterwards, may monitoring for symptoms. Kasi, going into this, no? Pwede ba ako makuha ng vaccine kung may hika ako? No? Yes, pwede. No? In fact, there's no contraindication to get the vaccine if you have any other existing comorbidity. Kung may iba kayong sakit, pwede naman po. In fact, mas may studies tayo na pinapakita na kapag kayo po ay may mga sakit o karamdaman kagaya ng diabetes, mataas na presyon, o kaya may history po ng stroke o kaya atake sa puso, ay mas malaki yung chance na ninyo pong mamatay sa COVID mismo, yung sakit ng COVID. So it is actually indicated that you are vaccinated to protect you, na kung sakaling mahawa kayo ng hindi naman yung malubhang version o baka mamatay pa kayo dun sa mismong sakit ng COVID. So you are encouraged to receive it. But of course, magpatingin din kayo sa doktor if you have certain conditions that can affect the immune system, lalo na yung mga immunocompromised, or if you are undergoing chemotherapy, o kaya you're taking drugs that will affect the immune system, gaya ng mga ibang sakit na yung mga rheumatologist diseases, no, like mga lupus, mga ganon. If you have those, it would be good to consult first your doctor para matimingan, kasi timing lang naman doon sa ang kailangan lang doon para hindi mag-react doon sa medications ninyo. Now, kung ang isa pang what you have to know is kung galing kayo sa sakit, isang febrile illness, no, you have to wait 14 days. Kasi again, yung diniscuss kanina, the vaccines require your immune system to work. So hindi pwede po busy yung immune system ninyo. So dapat tapos na yung infection, libre na siya, tsaka na namin ibigay. So usually we have to wait 2 weeks bago namin mabigay yung vaccine kung galing kayo sa isang sakit na mga nagkaka-fever o may ubo-sipon, mga ganon. Okay, that's the reason why, just to be on the safe side, if you don't immediately have access to COVID-19, make sure updated na kayo sa ibang vaccines to prevent yung mga other illnesses like flu or bacterial pneumonia, no, kung kaya, no. Kasi right now there are no existing studies to suggest na pwede kung kaya mag-overlap yung mga vaccines. Kasi for example, you can give multiple vaccines if they're shown it's okay. Kaso lang, sometimes if you give 2 vaccines at the same time, baka mamaya magsasapahon sila doon sa immune system, nag-aagawan sila doon sa immune system ninyo. So just to make sure na you get a good, robust immunity doon sa COVID-19 vaccine, mas maganda ibigay siya in isolation. Huwag muna isabay doon sa mga ibang vaccines habang wala pa pong masyadong studies looking at whether or not pwede isabay ito ng So ang flu vaccine, it will become available by the second half of April, usually available na yung mga flu vaccines for 2021. Iyan yun. Tsaka one thing, the side effect monitoring, we usually, side effects can occur as soon as within 24 hours and they can last as long as 72 hours, 3 days. If it lasts longer than that, we recommend na magpatingin na kayo sa doktor, no, para to check up, because especially in the context ngayon na dumadami na yung infections and with all of the variants around, it's not out of the realm of possibility po na baka mamaya nahawa kayo just before or during the time na binakunahan kayo. So remember, vaccines are not instant. It takes around 7 to 14 days to build some neutralizing antibodies against it, and you don't get full immunity until makompleto mo yung second dose, no? So it takes a while. So during that time period na nagbe-build up pa lang ng immune system, kung na-infect kayo dyan, then it's possible na mag-overlap ang symptoms. So if the side effects last longer than 3 days, you might want to get checked out kasi baka mamaya nahawa kayo bago pa kayo naturukan ng vaccine. So yun ang ibig sabihin nun. Just to make sure na, kasi pwede man. And that's the other reason why after getting your vaccination, since we're still in a pandemic, since marami pang hindi pa nabakunahan, you still have to wear your mask, you still have to observe yung primary, minimum public health standards, no? Para to ensure na hindi maghahawa-hawaan at hindi ma-complicate yung understanding yung mga pagsasabay ng vaccination and yung infection. Okay. Kailangan pa rin ba ako magpabakuna kahit nag-positive na ako dati? That's a good question, no? Right now, wala pang sapat na ebidensya na yung antibodies you get from yung initial ay tumatagal, no? Before, since COVID's only been around for about a year, no? Wala pang masyadong clear understanding dun sa tinatawag na reinfection. Now we're seeing cases na there are people that are getting reinfected, usually with the variant, and that has led us to believe that yung antibodies na na-form nyo dun sa initial infection ay hindi tumatagal or hindi na sila gumagana dun sa mga newer variants na lumalabas. So maaari din po ma-infect kayo kahit na nahawa kayo dati. However, ang recommendation for the vaccine rollout strategy is kapag kung nahawa kayo recently, ay hindi muna kayo bibigyan ng vaccine, not because there's any contraindication, but because for the sake of efficiency of rollout. Kasi kung tuusin, since galing kayo sa infection, meron naman kayong immunity for at least the next 3 to 6 months. No? Natural immunity tawag namin dyan. So habang may immunity ka naman na naturally acquired, ibibigay muna nila yung vaccine, ipa-prioritize dun sa hindi pa exposed, wala pang immunity. That's the only reason why. There is no specific contraindication naman na kung kagagaling kayo sakit ay bawal kayo makuha ng vaccine. Hindi naman po. Pwede naman din po for your protection. But because we're trying to vaccinate and immunize as many people as possible, that's the reason why pinaprioritize po yung mga hindi pa exposed. Yun lang naman ang ibig sabihin nun. That said, that's another reason why kailangan, even as people are getting immunized, even if kagagaling lang kayo sa sakit, please wear your mask. Please still practice your regular minimum public health standards because of the fact na maaari pa rin din po mahawa ulit, and we are still in the process of increasing the herd immunity of everyone in the population. So konting kooperasyon lang po habang hindi pa natin naabutan yung herd immunity level na gusto natin. Kung nabakunahan ako, maging mas malubha ang sakit pag nahawa ako. Okay, this question comes from yung observation na dati, yung sa dengue, no? Napansin daw ng mga tao, kapag hindi ka pa nahawaan ng dengue at nabakunahan kayo, kapag nahawa kayo, mas malubhang version ng dengue ang nakukuha. That is a property unique to dengue. We call it enhancement. That same property is not seen sa mga sa coronavirus. No, in fact, that was due to a issue in the rollout. No, I won't get into the specifics, pero medyo mali talaga yung pag-rollout ng vaccine ng time na yan. And if you look across the ASEAN, actually, a lot of countries are getting much benefit from dengue. Sayang talaga, from dengue. Sayang talaga kasi na if used appropriately and with the proper indications, it can do a lot in terms of decreasing dengue. Unfortunately, sa atin hindi nangyari yan, and that stresses even more why vaccine rollout strategies are important in order to not to undermine the confidence of people in vaccines. And this is where this is coming from. So as far as that, no po, wala naman pong ebidensya, and even the mechanism does not support any belief that getting the vaccine COVID will cause you to get more severe disease kung nahawak kayo kung sakali. In fact, sa lahat ng mga clinical trials po, walang naitalang kaso na mas malubhang COVID-19 na sakit ang natanggap sa mga nabakunahan. In fact, the zero yung mga fatalities dun sa mga groups na yan, and even the incidence of severe disease was significantly decreased. So yan ang alam natin, hindi po naging mas malubha yung sakit kapag nabakunahan kayo. So, summary, no? Vaccination is an established, cost-effective method to decrease the incidence of disease. No? Lahat ng vaccines po ay safe. They underwent the phase 1 and 2 trials, and they have been deployed in phase 3 to determine their efficacy. Pero efficacy is not the end-all be-all. Remember, ang importance of vaccine is that they are also able to decrease the severity of disease, hindi siya gaano kalubha. They shorten the duration, mas mabilis kayong gumaling, at and they decrease the mortality. Mas mababa yung chansang mamatay. And those are the important factors necessary in order to stop the pandemic. Kasi the pandemic will, if it's allowed to proliferate, mas lalang lalabas yung mga mutations that will lead to variants that can possibly undermine the efficacy of the vaccine. So race against time po talaga siya. Until we can get people that are immunized and increase the herd immunity, we need to vaccinate as many people as possible so that collectively lahat tayo maprotektahan. If you're to ask me personally, out of all of the vaccines, which one is the best? The answer is they're all good. No? And the main recommendation still stays. Kung may vaccine available, please get it. Kasi collectively lang naman, even if, let's say, in the long run, hindi kasing effective yung nakuha mo kaysa sa katabi mo, that's fine. Because collectively, as a herd, if everyone is protected and everyone is granted the same protection, not just in terms of not getting the disease, but also being protected from hospitalization or getting severe disease or even dying, then we all win. Kasi that's the point. If you can think about, ang hiling ko lang sa mga tao is to be a little bit selfless in terms of the vaccine. I will borrow the words of Father Danny Orbos ngayon kasi mag-Holy Week na. He said back at the start pa lang ng pandemic, wearing a mask is charity. No? Hindi lang naman para sa sarili, kundi pata rin sa kapwa kong tao na pinoprotektahan ko sila. Ganon din po sa vaccines. Na sana po kapag may vaccine, ina-avail po natin dahil hindi lang po gusto namin ligtas po tayo at ang pamilya natin, kundi yung kapwa nating kababayan. And with that, I'd like to thank the Philippine Genome Center for the support and also for yung mga ibang sangay ng gobyerno, the DOH, EB, also the USDPC, HRD, for the provision of the capacity, the manpower, and the equipment necessary for us to do the variant analysis and also tracing biosurveillance that we're doing for the country. And with that, I'm ready now to take any questions or concerns from the people. That's it. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Doc Ayes. Napakaliwanag ng inyong paliwanag at ito ay kinokomentahan ng mga tao sa ating thread. Meron lang tayong mga ilang participants na nag-raise ng kanilang mga kamay. So pwede ba nating tawagin sila, Jacob?
Sige po, mauna po si Ramedrano at up.edu.ph. Baka na mali lang ang raise ng hand to. Ayaw magsalita.
Okay. So yung susunod, kaya?
Wala na po.
Wala na. Okay. Sige. So, Doc Ayes, simulan ho natin yung mga tanong doon sa mga variants. Kasi ang isang tanong doon ay kung ito raw ba ay in-announce na publicly ng DOH, one. Tapos yung pangalawa ay, can we hear more details about the Philippine variant in terms of ability to spread, immunity avoidance, and mortality? Which of these has it gained the concern from? Okay. So yun yung una.
Yeah. So in terms of yung characterization of the variant, no, we call that the clinical indicators. Unfortunately, in order to get a better idea of that, mas kailangan i-document yung mga kaso, no? Not just in terms of the identifying of the sequence, no, the genetic sequence, but also the circumstances of that particular patient so that we get a better idea. Kasi lahat ng binanggit ko is based on our understanding of previous reports of the effects of that particular mutation or variant in the populations that were tested. Kasi it's a bit complex kasi yung routine of how we're supposed to do that is yung mga samples yan na sinubmit yung mga patients dapat follow up at kukunin yung serum, no? We don't do routinely post-infection serum analysis of samples. So it's a bit harder to make any more direct conclusions with regard to yung clinical outcomes that we can expect from the variant. However, if you base it just on the characterization of the mutations available, that's why we can only make some assumptions that it has an infection profile similar to the 3 variants of concern that have been previously mentioned. And it also exhibits mutations that may suggest that it has a propensity to be more resistant against antibodies. Hanggang dyan pa lang po. In terms of yung effect niya on mortality, that will rely on, as more cases are documented, that we can generate more clinical data that can inform the public. But until now, there have only been so many cases na naitala and limited pa rin po yung clinical data. So it rests also on yung DOH and also the local healthcare institutions to document these cases and may concerted effort to document po para mas maging malinaw sa atin kung ano ba talaga yung effects ng variant nito in our patients.
Thanks, Doc Ayes. So ito naman, what happens if I was vaccinated but unknowingly during the time of my vaccination, I was asymptomatically positive with COVID?
Yeah.
And then yung pangalawa, what can you say about ivermectin?
Okay. Doon sa and that's what I meant about monitoring side effects. Yung asymptomatic kasi usually you don't know. Ganon. So what will happen is parang you just got infected and you get your immunity, no? And because the virus can infect people asymptomatically, that's the reason why we have to keep ginigiit namin kahit wala kayong nararamdaman, please wear your mask, please maintain distancing. And that's why ang term namin dyan is universal precaution. When you say universal, hindi na assume everyone else is infectious, but also assume that you are also infectious. So yun yung idea noon. But as far as asymptomatic is concerned, it's fine. No, we don't have to test people first to make sure that they don't have the virus before they get the vaccine. You can just take it. If you're asymptomatic, then that's fine. It'll be what you call a subclinical infection. Ibig sabihin it just wasn't detected, but you will become immune nevertheless. Now, if you have symptoms, dun kailangan mo nang mag-evaluate. Kasi again, like I said, the vaccine is more efficient if you are what do you call this, not undergoing a current infection. Baka that's what you're getting at, no? If you're asymptomatic, baka mamaya hindi kasing effective. But the thing is, para nagsasabay lang kayo ng exposures, basically. Is what I'm saying. But if you have symptomatic, it's better to wait first because there's we're more sure kasi na baka mamaya might not be as effective kung isabay doon sa illness na yan. And you don't even know what the illness is. Kasi for all we know, it's not even COVID-19. It could be just the flu or something like that.
Yes, ivermectin.
Okay. Ang background ng ivermectin is an antihelmintic. Ibig sabihin it's a drug used to treat worm infestations. And it has two versions. No, it has yung the one that's used in the veterinarian practice and the one that's used to humans. And this comes from pretty old studies that were looking at its use as an antiviral. Ibig sabihin, they saw that it's able to inhibit viral replication. Specifically, they used its human immunodeficiency virus, the one that causes AIDS. Now, in those studies, they were able to show that it has a similar effect on the COVID-19 virus. But in order to get that, but that's in the lab. Ibig sabihin yung mga cells that we grow in culture, no? But in order to get that same effect in vivo, ibig sabihin sa katawan ng mismong tao, you have to increase the dose to therapeutic levels that are to levels that are more than 100 times higher than the approved therapeutic level in humans, which is why right now whatever effect is shown in the studies is not cannot be ascribed to the viral inhibition effect that ivermectin is shown to have in the laboratory studies. And I'm saying this because I'm not saying that there's walang basihan, no. The problem is with all of the studies coming out, if you look at them and you try to analyze them very carefully, they were done in hindi standard yung protocols na ginagamit. A lot of the terms and definitions are not clear. Some of the ways that they measured it make them difficult to analyze in total. And even if you've seen some meta-analysis, which is one of the highest levels of evidence where you combine lots of studies to kind of collectively increase the strength of recommendations, even there, even though they show a certain parang it's moving towards effect, the problem I have when I look at that is it has a very wide CI. Ibig sabihin yung confidence area is very large. So it shows an effect, yes, but it's like a toss of the coin. I don't know if it will or will not work in a certain person. And that's the point. When you're talking about safety and its use in people in a wide number of things, you have to be sure you understand the mechanism of which it works. And you have to understand that if you give it to someone, it will have the effect that you intended to have. Because so far, most of the reports that we've been seeing are in those cases where there has been a shown effect, but they don't tend to give emphasis on those where there is no effect, or if the effect was a result of ivermectin in combination with something else. Because in those cases, I don't know if it's really ivermectin or not. So that's the reason why, if you look at yung latest NIH guidelines, they do not have any recommendations. And then latest PCP statement together with the FDA and all of the other societies dito sa Medicina, we do not have any recommendation. Again, when I say recommendation, what that means is there's not enough evidence that can convince us that it is something that can be done safely, effectively, and also we can anticipate the results enough, no, to make a general recommendation. That does not mean bawal. It just means that in order to properly evaluate this with the safety of people in mind, it should be done in the context of controlled clinical trials, no. Yan ang ibig sabihin doon. But at the same time, I've seen people raising that argument as an alternative to vaccines. And what I can say with that is, no. Established po yung vaccines as a means of reducing yung infections. Ang ivermectin, I feel, is sort of like a bargaining. I understand that some people have their reservations with the vaccines, but all the more those same reservations should be placed on ivermectin. And that's why I find it a bit funny that people will tend to try to promote ivermectin when siya nga yung walang track record. Vaccines have a track record. So again, I am not for or against ivermectin. I just follow where the evidence goes. And currently the evidence does not show any enough to make a general recommendation that I would say with confidence that you can use ivermectin in any way to either for the prevention or the treatment of COVID-19.
Thanks, Doc Ayes. Yung susunod, hindi po ba mas maganda na ang unang bakunahan ay yung mga lumalabas, yung mga 18 to 65, para mapigilan ang mga mutation, kaysa sa mga seniors na nasa bahay naman at hindi pinalalabas? And then yung second question, bakit po ba mas mataas ang takot ng tao sa vaccines na galing sa China? May tamang rason pa ba
Okay.
para dito?
For the first one, that's a very good question. No, but you have to understand in the case of public health that there is no right or wrong. No, there are pros and cons to each approach. There are different strategies. That's true. And which one you select has it's based on what we call the risk assessment. Sinabi ni Chancellor nga kanina maganda, no? Based on risk, no? It's not about totally eliminating risk, it's mitigating risk. And you can look at that as arguments for and against certain policies. Now, it's true. No, if you want to focus on the working population because evidence shows that they are the ones more likely to transmit it, and that is a valid reason for it. But then the other argument against it is that they are the ones that are least likely to die anyway. So if you want to look at it in terms of efficiency in use of hospital resources, that's why you look at the higher risk groups that are more likely chance of dying. So again, there's no right or wrong. I'm not saying which one's right or not. It will depend on the implementing strategies and also what lobbying groups there are to promote or to certain approaches by the government. For example, a government like Japan, since majority of their population is elderly and they have very strong lobbying power in the parliament, then their strategy will most likely go to the elderly people. The same thing goes with us, depending on how our legislators, but that's the reason why kami, mga in the scientific community and also the health community, are the ones that are helping our legislators make that informed decision. No, kami, we don't make any recommendations outright. If you ask me, alin group ang pwede, I'll just give you the evidence. Pwede naman sa bata, pwede naman sa matanda. You might get annoyed by that, but that's the truth. It's not my job to tell you what to do. It's to present you with what evidence is available, and from there make an informed decision. Kasi again, wala namang right or wrong. These are both valid ways of implementing a vaccination strategy. But the one thing that won't change, and which is what I keep on repeating to people, regardless of if you get vaccinated or not, or who gets vaccinated, ang hindi nagbabago po is the basic minimum public health standards during a pandemic, because ito yung proven to stop the spread of transmission of the virus. Kung maaari pong malimitahan yung paglabas, pagsuot ng mask, and social distancing, frequent hand washing, yan yung mga ways that you can stem the tide of the that will help the vaccination efforts. No, hindi lang tayo nakasalalay sa vaccine. Remember, it also falls on us to play our role in preventing the spread of the disease. And then ano yung isang question about
China. Yung takot
okay.
sa vaccines.
Well, and this is a, I'm not an expert in anthropology and your relationship, but I do know that there has been, there are sentiments in one way or another against the Chinese. Aminin natin yan, especially with their role in the world, and that reflects itself in the way that people view the Chinese vaccines. Their part of it also is in the way that they're perceived in the West, no? It's very easy to criticize the way that they do their trials because they're not as open. For example, when they present their their phase 3 data, it's very unclear, and they're not very transparent about it. But from their perspective, and I'm not justifying them, I'm just trying to make you understand from their perspective, ang rules sa Manila, why do we have to play by the rules of the Americans? Sino nagpaano sa kanila na sila ang magsasabi anong dapat gawin? So you have to understand it from that perspective. But if you're looking at it in terms of, remove the race about it, whatever it is, the Chinese are, especially the companies that made it, Sinopharm, Sinovac, ganun. They have a very long track record of making vaccines, and they have the resources. So in terms of like yung reputable brands that have made vaccines, actually people should be quite confident kasi they are a long time player in the vaccine market. So it's not like they're doing this to make a quick buck or run away with everything. And the other thing with the China, I mean, it's also the way the media has portrayed it. No, parang they're saying, I'm sure you saw that. I'm not going to make any names, but a certain news outlet showed a table showing na yung Sinovac is so much more expensive than the other ones. Bakit kaya? And then it became a sort of political. Well, no, you have to understand. I alluded to this earlier. The technology involved, since it's a traditional format of the vaccine, requires a lot of capital outlay. It's not something that you can do just off the ano. It requires a lot of resources, and that's something that only China can do because they have that many people. They have that many ganong kalaking sector. 'Di ba nung start ng pandemic, they built COVID-19 hospitals in days, no? Yung hospital na sa atin, it takes months to build, they built it in days. And they can do that because they have the resources, they have the people, ganun kadami 'yon. So that's the same output that you put it. So I want to encourage people to kind of ignore first yung mga race, I don't want to call out anyone as racist, pero aminin natin that you're right, that it has something to do with it. But kami as scientists, we look at where the data is, we try to understand the situations behind it, and the vaccine is shown to have good the efficacy is probably not as high as the other USA vaccines, but in terms of clinical outcomes, it's very good. It's performing very well, and it has a good role to play in the stemming of the pandemic. So if it's available, I highly recommend people to get it. There's no reason why you should make it an excuse at any level na ayaw mong kunin kasi gawa ng mga Chinese. That is very unfounded and also, quite frankly, disturbing to say something like that.
Thanks, Doc Ayes. If the person experiences side effects after vaccination, are they contagious? Expected po ba yung low-grade fever and body malaise 5 days post-vaccine?
Okay, good question. Now, assuming that hindi kayo nahawa before you got the vaccination, side effects are not. No, that is a result of the immune system mounting a response to the And again, the virus, the be it a inactivated virus or the particles, these vaccines are not capable of infecting. No, they do not. Hindi sila katulad ng live attenuated like for your chickenpox. No, they will not replicate in your body. And that's the reason another one person asked me, kapag nabakunahan ako, tapos nag RT-PCR ako, nag-test ako, magiging positive ba ako? The answer is no. Because the amount of viral material that we introduce into you in a vaccine is so small that's not detectable at all by an RT-PCR. RT-PCRs work based on active replication of the virus in your body. And that's the reason why I think I saw this going around social media, people trying to explain na just because wala kayong nararamdaman at some point and nag-test kayo tas negative, as labas kayo, hindi kayo infectious. Not necessarily. Kasi baka mamaya, you're at a certain point in the illness na the virus was still beginning its replication, na there was not enough genetic material to be detected. And then at some point later, dumami na enough to be detected by the machine, positive ka na. So that's the reason why, again, paulit-ulit ko sinasabi, even if you tested negative, even if you got vaccinated, while we're still in the context of a pandemic, again, context of pandemic. Paalaala lang po, nasa pandemya pa po tayo. Habang pandemic pa, please wear your masks. Please observe social distancing. All of the minimum public health standards kailangan po natin sundin. Yan po.
Salamat ulit. Ito naman ay siguro si Chancellor ang pwedeng sumagot. May we request for an update regarding the COVID-19 vaccination in UP Diliman? What is the most recommended vaccine to be offered? Who can get the vaccine? Agency hired personnel included? How will it be given? Will recently retired independents be offered the vaccine? Baka maaaring sumagot si Chancellor.
Salamat, Dulce. Sa ngayon, nakikipag-usap tayo sa LGU at sa tatlong vaccine providers. No? We're talking with the groups that have brought in Sinovac, Covaxin, and Novavax. We're still deciding whether to do the procurement through the UP system. We will most likely do it as a system. And at the system level, we're still deciding how to distribute the vaccine. No? But definitely, we will be providing vaccines to members of the community. Kaya mahalaga para sa mga UP staff at faculty, no, sana'y sagutin niyo ang rinol out na survey. This past 2 weeks, we've I think rolled out at least 2 survey forms. No? These are not surveys, but these are actually sign-up sheets. No? We need to gather all the information, the important information that we need to be able to do an estimation of the kind of resource that we will be raising to provide vaccines for everyone.
Siguro to answer din yung question about what is the most appropriate. The most appropriate vaccine is the vaccine that's available to you. Collectively, all vaccines, although they have varying efficacy rates, they are still they work collectively in herd immunity. That's why I keep on reiterating, people don't have to get worried. Hindi dapat masyado niyang ikinambabahala yung efficacy rate kasi hindi lang naman yan ang habol ng mga mass vaccination strategies. In fact, it's even better if people can get a mixture of all the vaccines kasi the true efficacy, we don't know it yet until it's in the population and we do follow-up studies. Pero let's say, on the off chance na the true efficacy, halimbawa, of Pfizer might be a bit lower, like maybe 80% only, and then another vaccine is a bit higher than initially reported. You still benefit because yung katabi yung iba yung nabakunahan has a good efficacy, parang ganon. So it becomes a collective effort. If you think about it in terms of investment, it's better to invest in a lot. You hedge your bets on a lot kaysa naman sa isa lang. So again, in terms of what's best for everyone, there is no single best vaccine because you can't even compare them. They all have their role to play in stemming the spread of the infection in the context of the pandemic. So if you can get vaccinated with whatever is available, then please get it. Assuming that, of course, it is appropriate for you, considering any contraindications in the form of yung mga allergies to it, or if you need clearance first, like if you're taking any immunosuppressants or you have chemotherapy. So yun lang. Barring those things, if you're eligible for the vaccine, then please get it.
Thanks. Doc Ayes, meron tanong tungkol sa AstraZeneca. Ano raw ang masasabi ninyo tungkol sa mga reports tungkol sa blood clotting? Tapos yung isa pang tanong, do we need to self-quarantine after being vaccinated? At meron ding interesado na malaman kung kayo raw ba ay nabakunahan na.
Okay. For the AstraZeneca, this is a small group of people in a trial that it was mentioned, but I know they've already released yung final investigation of the report that there is no causal link that they were able to determine from it. So it does not cause. Again, what I want people to understand is in the context of these things, these are observations made, like so-and-so in this population nagkaroon ng ganito. So there are a lot of factors that lead to it, and association is not causation, okay? So just because you observe something with a certain doesn't mean it caused it. So that's why they have to investigate whether or not it actually caused it. And that's why when you look at all of the AZ trials done across the world, it was such a small event. Kaya it's very unlikely that it actually caused that. So it's already been cleared that there is no direct or causal link of the AZ vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, in causing any of the blood clots that have been shown. It does not increase the risk for blood clot formation. Now, ano yung second question about
Kung kailangang mag-quarantine after getting vaccinated.
Quarantining is intended to limit the spread. No, it's meant in contact tracing. So if you got vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine because you're not infectious. So, but what you should be doing is you should be maintaining and practicing minimum public health standards, wearing a face mask, social distancing, limiting exposure to crowded areas, etc. So, yan lang naman ang kailangan. You don't need to quarantine after you've been vaccinated. And then, ako, have I been vaccinated? Yes, I've been vaccinated. I received the Sinovac vaccination last start of March, March 3 ata or something like that. So my next dose is April 1, and I will be getting it. In terms of side effects, I had a mild fever, 36.5, something like that. But it's not that high. And then parang lantang-lanta ako. Masakit yung likod ko. Otherwise, that went away after 24 hours. No? Yung mga ibang kasama ko sa laboratory, they also got low-grade fevers. Yung isa nga, umabot as high as 38. But it went away after 24 hours. No? Kaya nakakatawa yung itsura ng lab ko kasi we went to PGH to get our vaccines. When we came back to the lab, lahat sila nakahiga lang sa ayaw nila magtrabaho. So sabi ko, okay, sige, close early tayo. Ganun. So that's expected naman na you can have some side effects from the vaccine. Basta ma-monitor and keep a diary. All of them, they were okay the next day. So yun ang experience namin dun sa vaccine. Some people in my lab also got AZ, AstraZeneca. They reported something similar. So I can't say if there's a higher incidence or not. But yun nga, parang lanta, mga joint pains, medyo masakit dun sa injection site, low-grade fever. Ganun.
Salamat ulit, Doc Ayes. Meron ulit tayong mga kasama na nakataas ng kamay. So, Jacob.
629. Yeah, wala naman kasi.
Ayan po, Miss June Lopez.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to get your opinion on what is circulating as a kind of a rather unconventional suggestion. And this is coming from another of our colleagues. This is Dr. Rafi Castillo of Manila Doctors. He had offered the idea na instead of concentrating on a huge mass vaccination campaign, we should also be holistic and support and find ways to provide for free preventive and therapeutic regimen to the mass population. He was also suggesting that we be cautious, if not to spend for now vaccinations of younger people if we are not going to be able to cover everything. Because he likens the vaccine as a way of shooting a moving target, that we are not even expecting that the vaccination will work for more than 6 months. What do you think about that?
Okay. I think this is the same guy who made the claim, or at least implied the idea that the variants now are a result of the vaccines. First and foremost, of course, it is important that any decision that involves human health is is supported by evidence, because that's the only way that we can ensure the safety of people. I am not against holistic methods, as long as they are safe. I believe that's fine. But I also believe that it should not come at the expense of undermining the importance of established methods of preventing the disease, which includes the use of minimum public health standards in the form of wearing face masks. Because again, these are the proven in statistical and studies in general, proven to prevent the spread of respiratory diseases, because that's what COVID-19 is. So in terms of provision of access to certain means of this, that would imply that local government units should be empowered to provide masks for all people, to ensure that all public spaces are conform to new normal policies. These are the type of things that should be instituted on a level that our population is confident in, all based on evidence moving forward of those things. I don't subscribe to the idea that there is a certain thing that we can take that will protect us. I believe in the Swiss cheese model, which means there is no single intervention that can provide ultimate risk reduction in any instance. Lahat po ng mga interventions or strategies ay may kanya-kanya mga butas, and by adding them additively, they should be able to provide a higher degree of risk reduction for our people. That is the way the strategy should be. So I am not very pleased to see certain advocates that push for certain alternative means while discrediting the established means based on evidence. That said, with the vaccination strategy, you have to understand that this is also based on the idea that this is a proven way to stem infections. And whether or not you're talking about a losing battle, that does not mean that the vaccinations themselves is useless, because I've showed you in the slides that they are able to prevent infection, they can prevent hospitalization, they can shorten the degree of illness, and they can also prevent death. And that in itself is a big deal, especially if you're looking at it from a larger picture in terms of public health policy implementation. Opting to delay vaccination not only increases the risk of variants of occurring that can further hamper vaccination development, it also places the population at risk for higher risk of death, and also can potentially be disastrous to our healthcare sector in terms of hospital bed usage, and also the indirect effects it has on management of other diseases. I think you remember yung early reports dun sa first bugso, unang bugso, a lot of hospitals were affected in terms of their staff kasi bukod sa napupuno yung mga kama, they weren't able to address the needs of other cases as effectively kasi naapektuhan sila. So these are some of the other considerations you have to take into mind. It's true, that may be the case, that the vaccines might not be as effective down the line, but that does not mean that we should make no effort to ensure that this vaccine be distributed to save lives, to minimize the mortality, and to also provide some form of economic relief that the health sector that will be experiencing as a result of outbreaks. Hindi pwede po yung hayaan na lang na mangyari yung mga cases na to when there is something that we can do. I believe that inaction in the face of something that you can do is a greater sin. Omission is worse than commission in any case. And if, for example, and whether or not the vaccine will still be effective in 6 months' time is still something that needs to be seen. But in the possibility that there are variants that come out that may affect it, there is still some amount of cross immunity that can be expected, which is why I keep on emphasizing efficacy is not the only thing of concern here. Even if you do get infected by it, even if the variant may possibly infect you, even though you were immunized before, the vaccines, of course, still have that ability to lessen the severity of disease. So there is still benefit to getting vaccinated now. If it's not to prevent infection, at the very least, again, it will decrease the severity of disease, shorten the duration of illness, and it will also decrease the incidence of death. Yun yung mga established based sa evidence. And that's the reason why yung recommendation is to still go for a vaccination-based effort to stem the pandemic and to lessen the number of infections.
Thanks, Doc Ayes. Ang isang tanong ngayon ay, are there stricter protocols to follow now that we have the South African variant on campus?
Okay. I mentioned it earlier, no? The recommendations for minimum public health safety remain unchanged, no? Kasi the mode of transmission is still the same. All of these recommendations are based kasi po sa paraan ng pag-spread, no? The mode of transmission. For this virus, it is in the form of respiratory droplets, and in some cases, it's airborne. In terms of casual exposure, yung pangkaraniwan exposure ng mga pangkaraniwang mamamayan, no, that means not including yung mga healthcare workers, the most common form of exposure is still the respiratory droplet. So the minimum requirement will be a face mask, pwede naman siyang double, no, N95 or otherwise, it doesn't really matter kasi most people use an N95 as a regular mask anyway if they're not trained as a medical professional. And to observe yung mga social distancing, minimizing contact or going outdoors as much as possible. So it's basically a reinforcement. No? As much as it is tempting to blame the current COVID cases, yung spike on the variants, that is not the only reason why. Aminin po natin, meron tayong pagkukulang as a country in terms of it. Because, for example, sa laboratory namin, when we looked at the spike of cases, the earliest inflection point na nag-start yung mga pagbugso ng mga kaso was in the 2nd to 3rd week of February. And you have to remember, yung mga kasong to, nag-incubate yan at least 2 weeks before. And if you align that with the cases, that aligns with a mass spreading event that happened in the last week of January. And the only public event that I can think of that may have promoted such a mass spreader event would be celebrations that occurred during Chinese New Year. So again, it can be traceable to human behavior and activity, and that's why as much ngayon ulit-ulit, alam ko pagod na yung mga tao, pero totoo yan, pagod tayong lahat. But if we want the pandemic to end, it can't end with just simply wishing it to end. There has to be some amount of effort on our end, and that's why paulit-ulit namin sinasabi, you have to observe minimum public health standard. You have to be careful. Kapag sinabihan kayo na mag-wear ng mask, mag-wear kayo ng mask. If as much as possible you can limit yung paglabas ninyo, please limit yung paglabas ninyo. And that's how you can address it. Because again, the mode of transmission, regardless of what type of variant it is, remains the same. It's still the respiratory droplet route.
Idadagdag ko lang, Doc Ayes, na naglabas tayo ngayong linggo ng ating guidelines, post-ECQ guidelines, na doon ay naka-outline o naka-enumerate yung ating mga protocols bilang pagpapaalala sa mga tao. I-remind din natin na sana lahat ng units ay magtalaga na ng kanilang mga health liaison officers at saka mga post-ECQ teams. Kasi importante ang mga mekanismo na ito para mas mabilis nating mapalaganap sa mga units yung ating mga information at yung ating mga protocols din. So pakibasa lang ho yung guidelines, nakaposto iyon sa websites natin sa UP Diliman. Meron daw na isa pang nakataas ng kamay. Pwede natin siyang tawagin, Jacob.
Martin.
Can I answer this question here? Kasi this is I don't know. There's a question here that says there are increasing number of infections after vaccination. Is it because the variant due to the variants or due to the vaccines? Kasi marami pong nabakunahan na nagkaroon ng COVID. This is what I mean about you have to understand yung timing kasi nagsabay yung number of cases with the rollout of the vaccine. That's not causation. Okay, just because one event occurs alongside another doesn't mean it caused the other, right? And that's what people have to be very clear about. No? The vaccine cannot protect you from the illness if you were vaccinated during a period of time that your body, that you are exposed to the illness. Again, the reason why I shared with you how vaccines work and how it's related to the immune system is because you have to understand that being vaccinated does not give you immediate immunity. Your body still has to make the antibodies that will serve as your immunity. Right now, halimbawa ko, I was vaccinated at the start of March. I am not yet fully protected because I have not yet received my second dose. And that is why kailangan ginigiit ko na kahit kayo ay nabakunahan na, you have to practice yung basic public healthcare standards. You have to wear your mask. You have to because you are still vulnerable. Okay, and yun lang talaga eh. what people have to understand. People are becoming more and more aware na that ganito pala ang how vaccines work. You might ask the question, bakit when I get injected with a flu vaccine, hindi naman ako kinakailangan mag-wear ng mask or maano? Because we're not in the context of a influenza pandemic. Again, this is why I have to keep on reminding people, guys, we are in a pandemic. Pandemia po ito. Things are different and things will change. So, just again, so that kind of logic doesn't work. No, ang dami ng kaso, nag-start yung vaccines ang cause ng no, that's not how it works. Nagkataon lang na nagsabay yung mga yan. Okay. If you look in other places like in the US, where they were able to start their vaccination program as early as late November, which was before the appearance of some of the major variants there, they actually had a decreasing number of cases. No, but the problem with them is that medyo matigas ang ulo, lalo na dun sa mga southern states. So they want to implement na pagtanggal na ng mga masks na nila, no? Because they're vaccinated na. And that's why even Dr. Anthony Fauci and all of the experts in the field are saying, no, we're still in the context of a pandemic. So please, no, it's very tempting to make these claims, and I understand why people would make it, but just understand na vaccines are proven to reduce the infections, no? And if they don't prevent you completely from getting the infection, they will decrease the severity, they shorten the illness, and they will also decrease the incidence of the possibility of you dying. Yan yung mga importante. You need all of those. Kumbaga para siyang stack of cards, no? In terms of stemming the pandemic. Stopping infections is only one part of it. You also have to stop people dying, stop people from spreading it, and stop people from getting sick as a result of it. And all of those can be addressed. Just because one was affected, yung infection, doesn't mean it's totally useless. And that's what I was trying to say kanina. Na hindi lang naman, hindi puro efficacy lang ang pagbabasihan ng whether or not the vaccine is good. There are other endpoints that you have to take into consideration.
Thank you. Jacob, tawagin na natin yung magtatanong.
Marte Villeda. Mukhang namali lang yata ng raise ng hand to.
Okay, sige. Yung susunod natin na question. Doc Ayes, eto. How would you assess the pace or scale of our current biosurveillance efforts? And then what do you think are the three main points media should focus on in terms of messaging at this time about the vaccines and the conditions we are facing?
Interesting. Okay. In terms of the biosurveillance effort, I think we are doing a good job given the restrictions. Given the unique situation of the Philippines, it's testament to how we can mobilize our resources. Kasi unlike other countries with their biosurveillance efforts, we have to deal with distance, no? Kasi we are an archipelago. Maraming mga ibang regions na mahirap mapuntahan, and yet our laboratories across the country are still able to submit samples to us in order to sequence. Because kami lang ang merong equipment to do this level of sequencing at this ganun kadaming amount. And it's just a question of the usage of this information, of course. But I mean, in terms of the information that we've been able to generate and provide the DOH, I believe it's testament to the immense capabilities of our scientific community, and something we should be very proud of. In terms of what the media should focus on, of course, I wish I could, no? Of course, they're in the business of generating buzz, so the tendency is to focus on negative news. So personally, I think if there's anything that they need to focus on in terms of variants, it should be educating people in terms of the implications of these variants, not just about fear mongering. No? It should be clarifying about what are the implications of these variants, and also how efforts can help stem the spread of these variants in terms of what our different agencies are doing. Because a lot of times it's very tempting for them to pick up pieces of information from other sources instead of talking to us directly. To the credit of some media outlets, they have been approaching us directly. No? But there are also those other ones that tend to just quote from other sources, international sources lalo na. And those international sources don't talk to us naman directly because they don't have our contacts. So, when that happens, it gets a little annoying because, things are lost in translation, things like that. But yeah, kumbaga, I'm not a fan, and another thing siguro I can say there is I'm not a fan of cynicism, right? Um, I would like media sana to put things into context, no? Like for example, the one where they showed a table that had the prices of vaccines and they just left it at that. Kayo nang humusga. And it's very obvious that it is trying to push for a certain messaging, no? Which is kind of annoying because it undermines rather than strengthens any confidence in vaccine deployment. No? So sometimes I wish the media would be a little bit more cognizant of the effects that their reporting has on the repercussions it has on things such as vaccine deployment, vaccine confidence, and things like that. If they're really in the business of educating people, they should, by all means, be more open to. We're open naman. If they have questions about it, they just have to talk to us lang naman. It's just that when their information comes from wherever, tendency is para.
Salamat, Doc Ayes. Do we have enough trained personnel who will administer the vaccines, especially at the barangay level?
With regard to training for vaccines, it doesn't really require that much. Usually, what do you call this? Registered professionals, medical can perform it because it's just an intramuscular injection. No? So doctors, nurses, technically medical technicians can also do it, and mga nursing aides, they can all give it. In terms of sa barangay and whether or not, I can't answer that. No, it depends on the LGUs themselves and the deployment measures that they have. But I know there are some efforts from certain NGOs, like for example, the Philippine Red Cross, I believe, is pushing for drives for volunteers from the medical field to volunteer as vaccinators, to help in the deployment. So those are some efforts that I know that are going on. But I would suggest that in your setting, in your local governments, if you want to know about that, you can try and contact the health offices directly and inquire. And maybe if you know any means that you could possibly help them, I think they would be more than happy to entertain interested parties who would like to offer support in terms of human and manpower or training necessary to help in the vaccine rollout.
Okay. My question would be about the concentration of the virus in enclosed areas. Am I correct that the viral load would easily disperse in an open area or houses with good ventilation? Is there a certain amount of the airborne virus na nawala? Okay. Yun na lang, Doc Ayes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yung circulate the specific amount, syempre we don't know. But what we do know from fluid dynamic studies is that areas with good ventilation can help. What we call it dilution, no? Meaning the number of infectious particles, if they are floating around, will be diluted to the extent that it makes your personal protective equipment in the form of face masks more effective. Kumbaga, yung mga filters natin, the face mask, they have a saturation point. So at some point, even if you have it on your face, if the surrounding area has a very high concentration of infectious particles, then there's a chance that they will fail. They become saturated and they no longer provide protection. That's the reason why, especially in enclosed areas, that's why we ask you to continue wearing your masks in workplaces, no? Because you're enclosed, there's a chance of concentration of any viral particles that may be floating around. And if there's not good ventilation, then there's the risk na masasaturate yung mga personal protective equipment and they will no longer provide the protection that you need. Established na po yun. That's why, for example, sa PGC, part of our biosafety, institutional biosafety measures is that we have regular airing of spaces at least twice a day for 30 minutes. So that increases the airflow, or what we call the air exchange in the room, that will dilute the air if there are any infectious particles in order to enhance the protective ability of your personal protective equipment para hindi sila saturate, kumbaga. As for the specific concentration, we don't know. I'm not aware of what the specific concentration is, nor do I think it's practical to have to calculate it. But what we do know is from a risk analysis perspective, your risk for transmitting in enclosed spaces decreases with increased efficiency of ventilation. So yes. For most offices, that means at least 2 doors, 2 openings, one for inlet, one for outlet. So if, for example, if you're in an office that has a entrance to the doorway, that's a high pressure area zone kasi, and a window going to the outside, which is low pressure, then you just have to open 1 door to the hallway and 1 window to the outdoors. That will facilitate for the movement of air in and out of the room. Ganun siya. So an inlet and an outlet is always better than just a single open window consideration of the job.
Okay, malaking detalye yon, Doc Ayes. Salamat. So ito, I understand the sentiment behind the saying that the best vaccine is the one that's available. But is there any difference in the indications or precautions of the different vaccine types for the elderly, those with comorbids, and healthcare workers? That is, are certain types better suited for these particular populations as opposed to the general population as a whole? Thank you for the great presentation.
Okay.
Sabi
So
niya.
again, for those specific questions regarding special populations, that will require specific studies to answer. And the thing is, they are non-transferable. No, the term. So, for example, if you want to see this vaccine in this population, you have to test it in that population. Which is why for all of them, there are no general recommendations for those type of populations. And that's why we say the words no recommendation. Again, I can't say this enough. No recommendation does not mean bawal, okay? What it means is there's no evidence to suggest whether or not to recommend such and such in a population, which is why the question, which vaccine is appropriate for which person, the answer to that, and I know it's not satisfying, is we don't know. Because remember, it hasn't even been a year since these vaccines have been deployed. And they underwent emergency use authorization. So a lot of the studies that have been performed in order to expedite its approval have been in the more general population. So yung mga elderly, mga children, wala pang masyadong evidence doon. Even doon sa mga may sakit, yung mga other comorbidities, wala pang masyado. Although there are some subpopulation analysis. Kasi kahit pa paano, you'll have some people who have those conditions that they're included. From initial subpopulation analysis, at least for most of the vaccines, I've seen that they don't have any special considerations. Kumbaga, it's safe, but they just recommend caution kasi ilan pa lang yan. Kumbaga, weaker evidence yan. Now, in terms of for elderly and children, what I can say is this. In terms of studies, kasi alam ko wala pang studies on those specific vaccines, we can look at other studies with using related types of vaccines. No, we call this low-level evidence. Dun sa mga lawyers out there are familiar, diba, in criminal law, if it's a criminal proceeding, diba, the level of evidence you need is beyond reasonable doubt, diba? But if it's a civil procedure, you only need preponderance of evidence, something like that, diba? Yung weightiness, that's what I mean when I say level of evidence. So for yung mga newer vaccines like yung Pfizer and yung AstraZeneca, the new ones, no, there are no established studies that have been done in the past because they're the first time to be used in the human population. However, yung mga traditional vaccines, the ones that use yung mga protein subunits, like yung Novavax, or yung mga inactivated viruses like your Sinovac vaccine, those ones, we have used those type of vaccines in the past and in those populations. So, and they have been shown to be safe. The problem is that specific vaccine, yung Sinovac, for example, there isn't enough evidence yet in elderly to make a general recommendation. But because we've used that type of vaccine in elderly patients in the past, it's a low level of evidence that you can use it safely, but take note of the risk involved kasi wala pang study of that specific vaccine. So low level evidence to suggest na relatively safe siya in those populations. Hanggang dyan pa lang. So low level evidence pa lang. If you want a more definitive answer, we'll have to see with studies, but that will take some time. Kasi again, it hasn't even been a year since we've rolled out these vaccines.
Salamat, Doc Ayes. Yung susunod na tanong ay para kay Chancellor ito. Ano po ang target period na ma-vaccinate ang UP employees? At kasama ba, UP students po ba included sa vaccination? Meron ding isang tanong kung babayaran din ba ang vaccination ng mga dependents? Chancellor.
Yes, Dulce, actually kasasagot ko lang ng mga tanong na to sa Q&A, no. Hindi papayagan ng COA na bayaran ang dependents. Pero isa pa, mas malaki ang bilang ng dependents kaysa sa bilang ng UP staff at faculty, no. Pero sinasama natin sila sa survey dahil unang-una tinitingnan natin kung maaari bang isama ang dependents sa ating pag-order ng bakuna. Pangalawa, tinitingnan natin kung meron bang ibang financing schemes, no, sources of financing, no, kung sakaling merong ilan sa atin na kailangan ng financial support para sa kanilang dependents. Pero sa ngayon, mahirap mangako. Sa ngayon, ang gusto lang natin, mabuo natin ang ating informasyon, no, tungkol sa bilang ng mga nangangailangan ng bakuna dito sa ating komunidad. Kasama ba ang mga estudyante? Tinitingnan natin kung maaari itong isakay sa free tuition dahil meron diyang items sa tuition na may kinalaman sa medical expenses, no. Pero pinag-aaralan pa to sa level ng system dahil iisa ang magiging mechanism natin para sa lahat ng CEO ng UP.
Salamat, Chancellor. Doc Ayes, meron na lang ho tayong ilang minuto bago tayo magsarado ng 4 o'clock. Pero habulin lang natin yung mga parang ilang questions na tingin ko common na tinatanong. At ito ay follow-up sa ventilation. Effective daw ba yung mga market air humidifiers o yung mga those we wear around our necks? Una. Tapos gaano katagal daw ba kailangang ibukas yung mga pintuan for proper ventilation? And then, meron ding nagtatanong na safe bang mag-travel as long as all passengers are vaccinated?
So, just to clarify, there's a difference between a humidifier and an air purifier. By humidifier, that means it's increasing the ambient H2O in order to increase the humidity to a certain area. If you've ever wondered, kasi kapag parang nagbe-breathe in kayo, parang dry na dry yung hangin, no? That means mababa yung, parang raspy yung feeling. That's where the humidity is. There's no evidence to suggest that using humidity or yung ang tawag dyan, parang ginaganyan nila para yung steam therapy. There's no evidence to suggest that helps. In fact, wala, no. Air purifiers, they can work. Yung personal air purifier that I don't see any evidence to suggest that helps. It doesn't hurt, but it's just don't again, Swiss cheese model, don't rely on one device to protect you from everything. Okay, it might help. I don't know. There's not the evidence that suggests it does. But air purifiers in general, they may be helpful, especially in situations where airflow or ventilation may not be as ideal. However, take note that there is a Korean study that looked into the risk that may be associated with the placement of the air purifier with regard to the people in the room. So, for example, you have to understand the design of yung mga air purifier. They're mostly the same. Medyo patayo siyang ganyan. It has inlet valves on the bottom and it has an outlet port on the top. The reason for that is kasi in order to service a room of a certain size, it has to eject the air in what's called a plume. So kumbaga ganito yung itsura niya, ipo-plume out niya yung air, so medyo malakas, so that it hits the ceiling and then it falls downward like that. So that's how it works, how it spreads the air. So pag nangyari ng ganyan, pag pababa na yung clean air, the dirty air is circulated from the bottom of the unit. That's how it works. So it's able to cause a circulation of air movement like that. That's how air purifiers work. So ideally, they should be put in the middle of the room or something like that para mas effective yung not against the wall kasi parang not as effective. Although you can do that, but baka maapektuhan kasi yung efficiency. But what you have to understand, because of that plume, it should ideally, the outlet should be installed at a level above the head of a typical person. Kasi if not, there's a possibility that infectious droplets can get caught in the plume. Okay, what does that mean? Halimbawa, ito ako, and then nandito sa tabi ko yung machine. Kapag asyo akong ganyan, the infectious droplet will go like this, it'll hit the plume, So magsaspread muna yung particles across the room bago pa siya mahigop ng machine. So in these cases, you have to be more cognizant of where you install the air purifier. Kung kaya on an elevated area or away from people directly. So kumbaga, if you have an office, kung nakapalibot lang sila sa gitna yung machine para malayo sila, and then advise people not to talk or to be close to the actual purifier while it's working. Those can be some strategies. There are also some detached aircon units, yung detached type, di ba? Na meron built-in air purifier. Those ones are also good kasi they work by blowing air in this direction, horizontal across the room kasi, and then hinihigop nila pababa. So that can also work kasi without avoiding the risk of spreading the particles in the room before they can be purified. So, but again, going back to the question with the personal air purifier, I honestly don't know. Kasi fluid dynamics is a very, I don't know if there's some physicists in the room, but you can imagine the complexity if it's dangling from your neck. How is it supposed to capture air and direct it to you in this way to ensure that the air you receive is truly all purified when air can also be coming in from the sides, diba? Yun lang yung mga questions ko doon about whether or not personal air purifiers actually work. Kasi if you were to ask me, based on the fluid dynamics, it doesn't make sense. But I don't say na, I mean, I don't see any reason why it doesn't cause you harm. So you can wear it, sige, but again, don't rely on it as the sole means of protecting you. So yun lang.
Maraming salamat, Doc Ayes. Unfortunately, ay wala na ho tayong oras, pero meron tayong mga 30 plus questions pa na imposible talaga nating matapos sa ngayon. So ang gagawin ho namin ay i-collect namin ito lahat at talagang pipilitin namin na makagawa ng Q&A, FAQs para mailabas sa atin lahat. At kukonsultahin namin si Doc Ayes para sa tamang kasagutan sa inyong mga tanong. So sa ulit, maraming salamat Doc Edsel. Pero bago tayo magtapos ay tinatawagan natin si Dr. Mayrisa Alip para sa ating closing remarks at ang bagong UHS Director natin.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Ayes, sa napakalinaw at napakaayos na pagpapaliwanag mo tungkol sa COVID-19. Napakaliwanag po na ang sinabing Dr. Ayes para masugpo natin itong COVID-19 ito ay tulong-tulong tayo na sundin ang health protocol. May dagdag lang po sana ako na sana palakasin din po natin ang ating resistensya sa pamamagitan ng pagtulog ng sapat na oras, pagkain ng may sapat na nutrisyon at magbawas po ng stress. Huwag po kayong matatakot na tumakbo sa University Health Service kung kayo ay may nararamdaman. Nang sa ganon ay may properly assess kayo ng mga doktor natin na duty naman po 24/7. Ngayon po dun sa mga naman hindi sa palagay nila hindi urgent ang kanilang nararamdaman, meron po tayong telemedicine from Monday to Friday po. So ngayon, bago ho tayo magtapos, pinanalalangin ko po na sana tayong lahat ay magtulong-tulong para itong pagbugso ng COVID-19 ay ating masugpo. Nang sa gayon, sama-sama tayong maging masaya, maging malusog muli, mabuksan lahat ng edukasyon, mabuksan din ang ekonomiya, para nang sa gayon, bumalik po ang sigla sa buong Pilipinas at sa buong mundo. Mabuhay po tayong lahat, mag-ingat po tayo at magandang hapon po.
Maraming salamat at magandang hapon sa lahat. Thank you, Doc Ayes.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Dr. Ayes.
Welcome po.
Thank you, Jacob.
Salamat.
At sa ating mga technical staff, kay Will at saka kay JP.
Salamat din po.
Thank you.
Salamat sa lahat.
Ma'am, maaari daw po bang kumuha ng kopya nung kay Dr. Ayes? Napakaganda.
Oo, Doc Ayes.